Hello and welcome to the Courtenay Turner podcast. We have Matthew Ehret returning to the show, and we're going to talk about some of the parallels between the French Revolution and what we are experiencing today. Some people have been calling it French Revolution 2.0, and we're going to talk about why. So this should be a fun discussion. And before we get into it, I want to invite you to support the show in any way that you feel inclined and are capable. Liking, subscribing, and sharing the show with those you feel might find it of interest and value is always greatly appreciated and costs you nothing. So hit the like button. It really does help. And you can also head on over to CourtenayTurner.com. That is spelled like Courtenay. So it's COURTENAYTURNER.com. And we have all sorts of ways that you can support the work I'm doing so that we can keep this thing going. And you can send me analog fiscal support and messages. I greatly appreciate reading all those handwritten letters. Those are super fun. Little throwback in time. It feels very anachronistic, but it's super fun. So that's Courtenay Turner, and it's 6041 Rural Plains Circle, Suite 110, number 106, Franklin, Tennessee, 37064, the zip code. And then we also have Venmo options at Courtenay's. Again, it's spelled like Courtenay, so COURTENAY -Turner. And we have a little buy me a coffee icon on the site. You'll see that right next to the Venmo. I think it's a little bit lower than the Venmo, but it's right there. And then we also have the relaxed sauna. So I talk about these all the time. I absolutely love my sauna, and they are doing a $100 discount for my audience. So if you're interested in one of these, definitely take advantage of that. You can use the promo code QUARTZ at relaxsaunas.com. And you will find all sorts of great products there. And this is a great way to boost your immunity, to detoxify. And it also just feels great, especially in the winter, which is coming up for us here. I can already feel the temperatures have dropped, especially in the morning and the evening. And this is a great way to warm up. And it's like an internal heat. So I love the sauna. I'm obsessed with it. So this is relaxsaunas.com, and use your promo code QUARTZ. And we also have the satellite phones, which I've been really stressing right now because, people who have been through the hurricanes, there's also the wildfires going on in the Northwest. I know a lot of people, media coverage has not been talking about it, but there's just all these weather catastrophes. And a lot of people have lost touch with their loved ones, which is very unfortunate. And it's kind of one of those things people don't really think about when they think about preparedness. They think about getting your food and, all sorts of energy resources, but people typically don't think about how are they going to get in touch with their loved ones if they can't use their cell phone. And this is a great way to do that. Your satellitephoneStore.com, use your promo code QUARTZ and you'll get a free phone, and the phones are quite pricey. So that is a great thing to take advantage of. You'll have to pay for the cell phones for the satellite phone service, but you'll have the phone for free. So that is accessible. You can use it for any other phone. So you can call from satellite phone to satellite phone. You can call from satellite phone to a cell phone or a landline or an old school rotary phone, just any phone you can reach. And this is something I really encourage people to look into, even if you don't use this, definitely look into ways to be able to stay in touch with your loved ones in states of emergencies or just when you're outside of cell phone range. A lot of places don't even have cell phone service. So this is something to really keep in mind. And we also have rncstore.com, and this is not the Republican National Committee. This is Richardson Nutrition Center, and I love my apricot seeds. I take them every single day. This is where I get a great source of vitamin B17, otherwise known as Laetrile, and many doctors were, robbed of their license or even put in jail for exposing the wonders of Laetriles and amygdala, which is B17, that can be found in these apricot seeds. So this is a great way to boost your immune system, and you can use your promo code QUARTZ at rncstore.com. So again, COURTZ. And this is a great way to boost your immune system. They have lots of literature on the site that will educate you about why B17 is such a great immune booster, including G. Edward Griffin's A World Without Cancer. And speaking of the legendary G. Edward Griffin, I will be at the Red Pill Expo that is coming up. I can't believe how the time is flying, but it is coming up soon. This is in November 16th and 17th with an optional day of the 18th. And I will be there with Dr. Lee Merritt, the Dangerous Dames, as we are. We will have a booth and we will be selling our t-shirts. They were a great hit last time. We have our Team Human t-shirts. We'll have plenty of those this time. And definitely come by and say hello. And also, one last thing, we have lots of other products. Definitely go check out the sites or click the links below. But we also are, for a limited time, we will still have the Cognitive Liberty Conference.com. That conference will be available to watch the replay. So definitely take advantage of that before it is taken down. So cognitivelibertyconference.com, and that will get you the 2-day replay. And it was just an incredibly edifying experience. I learned so much. Everybody who attended, and whether it was in person or virtually, has told me that they've had to watch it multiple times and take notes. And I take that as a huge compliment and a sign of a great success. So definitely go check that out if that's something you're interested in. And before I ramble on any longer, let's bring on Matt Ehret. How are you doing today?
Hey, Courtney. I'm okay.
Hi.
How are you?
Well, I'm looking forward to this. So, yeah, we had a little exchange about how it seems to be like the French Revolution 2.0. And I think even just thinking about the inception of the left and the right, that concept really was born out of the French Revolution. And it has been, I feel like it's been quite the tool, the Hegelian dialectic tool to play us like a fiddle towards the middle and then up through to the omega point. As we're watching
well
today.
said. Well said. Yeah, we've dovetailed on this sort. We've almost broached this conversation on a few of our past discussions.
Yeah.
And I figured, like we were talking a little bit after our last chat on Jack the Ripper, how it would be really useful to just launch right into a discussion directly on the French Revolution as the precursor for the Great Reset of a sort.
Yep.
And yeah, it's such a dense period of world history that gives us so many lessons. If we look for it, if our minds are tuned to looking for those lessons, we'll find them all over the place in some of the richest bounty of discoveries pertaining to our current situation by looking at the French Revolution, both for good and for bad. Because at the same time, the French Revolution, I even prepared a few slides because I think it's so important. And people have responded pretty well in the past when we've done little slides. So it'll, I think, carry the conversation nicely. So actually, let me just do that. Let's just launch right into the slides. Let me just do okay. So I've titled this the French Revolution Revival. As far as the Great Reset as a precursor, or otherwise known as Why You Shouldn't Lose Your Head When Satanists Are Afoot. It's a subtitle of this thing.
Wait, why you shouldn't lose your head?
When Satanists are afoot.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, because the French Revolution turned into a bloody terror pretty quickly, right? It had some noble aspirations and ideals at the very beginning, but it fell apart so quickly, and people got so crazy. And I think even today, there's an overly simplistic relationship that modern society has towards what happened. In the French, even to this very day, are so brainwashed. They're so traumatized, and there's unresolved trauma amongst the French population that they still celebrate Bastille Day as a national holiday in France, which is insane when you realize it's like celebrating like 9/11 as a national holiday, as somehow a moment of freedom. It was, the whole thing was an inside job designed to turn the society inside out and really reset all of the traditional values that had been animating culture for millennia. Just reset it all and create a post-Christian age that in many ways is the precursor to the emergence of fascism in the 20th century and a lot more. And so I'm going to get into some details.
Yes.
And as a disclaimer, some of what I'm going to show, I was asked to put together by Del Bigtree a couple of months ago after the Paris Olympics had happened. And people saw a lot of weird symbolism in the Olympics, and his audience wanted some clarification of what the hell was going on with the Paris symbolisms. So I obliged, and now I learned new things since I did that presentation, which I added to this thing. And anytime you want to stop, like usual, we could do little detours and side chats easily. So
Yeah.
jump in. All right, let me just open up my thing here. Okay, so the French Olympics had a mascot, right? Cute little thing called the Phrygian, the Frege, Phrygian caps holding the French flag. Seems,
I've been doing a little digging on the Phrygians. I mean, they're older than the ancient Egyptian. Like, it's one of the oldest civilizations that nobody's ever heard of. Yet, I think it's something like 8, or I don't remember exactly how many states have it as a symbol, like this Phrygian cap. And it's supposed to be the symbol of freedom. But when you study the Phrygians, that seems a little kind of oxymoronic. Yeah, I've just recently started diving into Phrygians, and they're interesting. But yeah, go on.
yeah, the whole Anatolia area, like this whole culture. There's some weird stuff going on in the ancient pre-Christian world, and we're gonna see a lot more about that in this presentation. We'll chat about
Okay,
that.
great.
There was some weird stuff as well. You know, you had Marie Antoinette during the opening ceremonies singing to people with her head cut off, and there was a bunch of other Marie Antoinettes, right? One of the anomalies of the French Revolution that is important to recognize is that Christianity was totally banned. Death sentences were given for anybody practicing, any priests who were carrying out Christian mass. They would be given the death sentences, as would families who might be harboring or protecting a priest or a nun. So a lot of people were killed. There was about 40,000 decapitations using the guillotine between 1792 and 1794. The vast majority were actually from the poor classes. There were rich people, like some aristocrats were killed, but the vast majority were either people of the church or peasants who were accused. Basically, they had these secret juries, or secret, not juries, these secret courts, run in many ways modeled on the same program of the Inquisition that had been set up for several centuries earlier by the Dominicans and the Franciscans. Really coming out of the late 13th century was when the Inquisitions really got underway. And so that became the model of what was done, and anybody could accuse anybody of anything. So there were a lot of very dirty, like, you know, it was kind of like the McCarthyite period, where you could be fired from your job, lose your security clearance, go to jail if your neighbor accused you to the FBI of being a Soviet sympathizer. Like, it was quite crazy. Another anomaly just to hold in mind before we really launch into this, that I want people to hold as an irony, because it's really the ironies that I find are the source of discoveries. You got to look for the things that don't fit a story. So we're given a popular story and certain things won't fit. Those places where they don't fit are going to be the paradoxes that the mind should hold on to as sort of like a splinter that must be resolved through a creative discovery or an irony that makes you sort of chuckle. It didn't fit within the model, right? So one of the ironies that I find is that the American Revolution of 1776 was made possible through major assistance from France, specifically various people around Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, Marquis de Lafayette. Hundreds of French freedom-loving people risked their lives to come over, illegally at first, to assist Washington in the cause to fight the British. And the outcome, as Benjamin Franklin said, was a republic if you can keep it. So there was actually something better, with flaws, but something incommensurably better that was established at the end of the Revolutionary War, again made possible through the support of France, as well as other countries. But for our purposes today, I'll make a point of France. The French Revolution, which had very similar noble ideals, was launched some years later in 1789. Its outcome was a bloodbath of several years of terror, anarchism, anti-Christian reset. French Republicans were decapitated, forever wars, and then finally a Roman Empire revival. So Napoleon actually had seen himself as the heir to a world empire with an east-west unification of a new world religion under his particular variation of what he thought Christianity should be, which had a lot to do with his escapades into Egypt and bringing back a lot of obelisks into France, which we'll talk about.
Yes.
But that was sort of the resolution to something. Also, the French calendar system was also overthrown too, right? They got rid of anything that smelled of the former ancien regime, right? The obsolete age, where they now instituted all of a sudden a 10-day decimal based calendar system.
Yeah.
They got rid of Christmas. They introduced like the Day of Reason. There was these strange new cults, like the cult of the supreme being, that was sort of an anti-Christian reemergence of the solar cult of Helios, of Julian the Apostate, that people like Robespierre was overseeing, trying to bring into being. Also in opposition to that, you had the atheistic cult of reason, which was sort of an Enlightenment Lockean cult that said human logic has rendered God obsolete. So these two cults were fighting each other. Representatives of either side were cutting off each other's head. And as you pointed out, this was also the age of the left-right creation, right? So on the one side of the Assemblée, you had groupings that would represent the Jacobin movement.
Mm-hmm.
And on the right-hand side, you had the Girondin movement, the movement of the supreme being versus the movement of pure logic. One would be more would be categorized as what became the modern right, versus the emotional based left. And it was sort of this right hand, left hand alchemical path of this, which is sort of how we've all been played by the Rosicrucians and all these other like mystical societies for all of human history, is this formula of like feminine versus masculine, left versus right, feeling versus thinking, dichotomizations and movements associated with those joint things, whether it's the Hospitallers and the Templars, or whether it's the Dominicans and the Franciscans. One is emotionally driven, one is more like scorched earth, where the dogs of Christ burn the earth to rebuild. Dominicans, but they work together, right?
Yep.
Always. So all that to say here, let's get back to it. Let's do this show okay. So got our irony. We got irony. One went wrong. One had something incommensurably worse that came out of it. One had something incommensurably better. So what happened? To appreciate that, one thing I want people to keep in mind is this story involves battles within lodges. You had a lot of the leaders of 1776 who were Freemasons, who operated through Freemasonic lodges, as well as Marquis de Lafayette, a leader of France. Many of them got their heads cut off in France. That's been George Washington in a painting of him in a Freemasonic sort of apron. Henry Clay was a leading American patriot who understood the British Empire very well. A lot of them were operating through lodges.
Yep.
But it's not exactly, you can't simplify this to say all things are equal, all lodges, because Freemasons have been evil, thus all Freemasonic lodges all throughout history are all equally evil. You can't say that. And in fact, what I'm going to get as a point is that there was a takeover and infusion of patriots who used the institution of the lodges as a mode of communication and collaborating to coordinate an international network. Because you have to pass on secret messages. There's no email, there's no phone. So the lodges became some of the lodges became expedient that Ben Franklin utilized, that had branches in France, in Russia around Catherine the Great, in India, even when they were organizing Hyder Ali and the Muslim uprising against the British in 1780 to 89. That was also done in conjunction with the American Patriots. And letters were being written back and forth from the Muslims in India to the American Continental Congress saying, our fight is your fight. Let's create a new society based on natural law, like real natural law.
Right.
So that's what the empire didn't like. In England, you had, in France, you had certain figures like the guy in the middle is Jean-Sylvain Bailly, Ben Franklin's key scientist, statesman, the mayor of Paris. He was the first president of the Assemblée Nationale that set itself up in June of 1789. That ushered in the rights of man sort of a foundational document for France to overthrow the monarchical systems, but premised upon the ideals of the American Declaration of Independence. It's a very good document. There's nothing wrong with that document at all. And on the right is Lavoisier, the great chemist. Also, both men whose heads got cut off by the Jacobin Terror. They were both leaders of the revolution. They were all scientist-statesmen, poets, right? Like all of these people were much more integrated. They came from a different kind of culture than the type of toxic waste that you and I were born into. There's a better appreciation for what is a normal, healthy, integrated person that these people sort of tapped into, that gave them a power of creative courage and flexibility that is really mystified in our society today. But again, these qualified leaders lost their heads. This is Jean-Sylvain Bailly once more. Again, he was the leading astronomer. He was making cutting-edge discoveries in science,
Right.
at the same time as he was doing this. And so he actually, just to get a sense of his character, right before he got his head cut off for being a counter-revolutionary, he wrote a little autobiography. And he said here, never had so many individuals sacrificed so much and demonstrated so much generosity by voting in one concerted action, and all at once. It is the night of destruction of privileges and of public happiness. So the rise of public happiness. The feudal system that weighed on the peoples for centuries has been destroyed in one blow. And in an instant, the National Assembly had accomplished more for the people in those few hours than the most wise and enlightened nations have done during many centuries. Now, what was he talking about? He's specifically referring before Christianity was banned. That banning came in 1792. Before that was set, he was saying this in 1789, in June 15th or something. When they go to the tennis court, that's him in the middle in a painting presiding over the tennis court of where the first and second estates were abolished. The idea of the absolute control over, I mean, the church was the biggest landowner. There was a lot of corruption in the church. It was endemic, a lot of expectations of pure obedience from people who were expected to remain ignorant. And the church was sort of a branch, or much of it was, not all of it, but there was a lot of corruption in the church that became an instrument for control by the oligarchy. That was sort of the first estate. The second estate was the feudal oligarchs, the hereditary powers that kept control of the seigneuries, the feudal estates.
Mm-hmm.
So people were not recognized as having any more rights than a cow in that system. You were born into the land. You were the property of the landowner that owned the land that you were born into, right? So that was like all overthrown, which is good. It's good. And there was a big fight of those who wanted to keep a hold of that old system and those who fought against it. However, as is often the case, something gets out of hand, which again results in, all of the people who are doing this good stuff dying. Just to say quickly, Mozart, people know, was also a Freemason, and the Vienna Lodge was extremely important because you had what's known as the Nine Sisters. Lodge represented the Nine Muses that Franklin operated primarily throughout Europe, which had branches all over, in France as well as in Vienna. This is one of them, and this is run by this guy Schenkinator, who had a scientific journal for the masses. It wasn't for the elites, and when you read it, actually, I got a little quote here from an anti-Masonic figure of the 1790s who went to the Mozart Lodge. That's actually this black guy was a former slave from Africa who found his freedom and became the head of this lodge as well, like a really, really cool scientist playwright in Vienna. And actually, after Napoleon, I'm forgetting his name all of a sudden, but Napoleon actually ensured that his when he was buried, they stuffed his body, like he died, and they stuffed him and put him in a museum as a way to sort of take a crap or try to downgrade the idea of the blacks as having somehow the same quality of ennoblement of the soul potential as whites. And they put him in a museum stuffed with other animals in like 1802 or something. It was really gross.
Wow.
But he was a beautiful soul, friend and ally of Mozart. Some of these key people around Beethoven as well were part of this thing. And just to say, here's this figure, George Foster, who visited Mozart's Vienna Lodge. He was a guy who was exposing these Masonic networks, and he was an enemy of most of the Freemasons. But he said, and he published an article saying that this lodge, the Mozart Lodge, publishes a Freemasons journal in which everything, faith, the oath, and ceremonies, and even fanaticism is more openly discussed than at home in Saxony. The best scholars and poets are members of this lodge. Joseph Pologne. That's his name? Okay. Cynthia overheard me talking in the other room. She came out saying that's Joseph Pologne, the black guy I was mentioning.
Awesome.
And thank you. Thank you. Courtney says thank you. Okay. And then George Foster goes on to say, they make light of the whole idea of secrecy and have transformed the entire thing into a society of rational, unprejudiced men dedicated to enlightenment. And it's true. When you actually look at the scans of some of this journal that have been described to me, they're rendering transparent the construction of the Pentagon, of the things that are supposed to be like secret geometrical figures, knowable only to the inner elites. They're making it all transparent and intelligible for everybody to understand how the Pentagon is formed utilizing the golden section, the nature of different harmonic proportions mathematically that were supposed to be reserved only for the elites. So it's very different. It was a cultural fight to ennoble the souls of the masses, to have a society of what. Well, this is the idea of the mission was how to create an aristocratic society. What I mean is not a society that is elitist, but a society where every single human being can develop the aristocratic quality within themselves. And aristocrat, by what I'm talking about here, is the literal term of society, the rule by the best. Aristos, krasi, is Aristos the best rule over, right? That only works if you have a society where everybody recognizes that we all have this sovereign aristocrat with it, that we're all sovereign, right? It's not just one monarch, it's everybody. Right. So that requires culture, education, an ability to appreciate higher beauty instead of just simply low-level sensual beauty. So I'll get back on that. Here, how do I get? Okay. All right. So that's George Foster. Okay. In opposition to that, here's a figure who plays a key role in destroying the French Revolution from a good thing. Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham. That's a wax figure of Jeremy Bentham sitting there. That's his head, his rotted head, which he wanted in his will and testament to be what do you call it, laminated or whatever, and accompanied with his body. And I think he's got bones. So inside of the wax form, there's his physical bones. That's on display in some British school. I forget which university. Yeah. Now he's a figure who plays a key role as running British foreign policy, British intelligence. He's a student of Shelburne, who is one of the top controllers of the British Empire. Shelburne is the guy who assigns Adam Smith to draft his treaties on the wealth of nations as an argument to justify why the American colonies or no colony of the empire should ever have manufacturing or utilize protectionism or direct national banks, because all markets should be free. And the whole thing was designed to ignore the fact that there is the British East India Company and the City of London that would disrupt the rules of the game that they wanted everybody else to abide by, right? So Bentham is one of the key figures who has a huge amount of influence in the French Revolution. He writes here in his philosophy on morals and legislation in 1780, the same year that there's a proto-French Revolution in England that they test out under what's called the Gordon riots. So he says here, nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do, as well as to determine what we shall do. Every effort we make to throw off our subjugation or subjection will serve but to demonstrate and confirm it. The principle of utility, the greatest happiness or greatest felicity principle, recognizes this subjection and assumes it for the foundation. Systems which attempt to question it deal in caprice instead of reason, in darkness instead of light. So, I mean, what does he say? It's basically that, fundamentally we have to only allow society to be organized by a factor of judging what is right and wrong by considerations of fleshly pleasure and pain. That's it. Anybody who tries to go outside of that is a fool. So that's the determining factor. This is not at all what made the American Revolution possible. Because if you operate on that, then nobody would have risked their discomfort and potential death of themselves and their family for the sake of an idea like the concept of the principle of liberty, right? You wouldn't do it. So this is a guy, again, like I said, who was overseeing and participating with Shelburne in something that involved the Lord George Gordon, who later becomes a Kabbalistic rabbi and advises Queen Marie Antoinette. But at the time, Lord George Gordon leads a massive mob of British what are essentially British Jacobins to storm Westminster, the Parliament. They put a lot of parliamentarians in hospital. The whole thing is like based on some conscription law to stop, around getting the Irish to go and fight the Americans across the ocean. Now, what does Shelburne do as Minister of the Interior? He delays reading the Riot Act for at least 5 days while this Jacobin mob just lights London on fire. After a sufficient amount of chaos is done, the government of Lord North, who was doing a bad job overseeing the American Revolution, is forced to resign, and now Lord Shelburne is brought in to replace him. So Lord Shelburne initiates a coup inside of England, which is being incompetently run. He's still working with various Hellfire Club people, and in fact, one of the Hellfire Club people who's very useful in this operation, who ends up being assigned to finally put down the Lord Gordon riots, these British Jacobins, is Wilkes, John Wilkes. And the last name might ring a bell for people here.
John Wilkes Booth?
Yeah, the great-grandfather of John Wilkes Booth is the second in command of the British Hellfire Club of Sir Francis Dashwood, which basically runs the entire British government between 1740 all the way till this period. It's the Hellfire Club, that's the Gnostic satanic cult, which Wilkes even
like
testifies.
Proto Bohemian Grove.
Yeah. I mean, it's yes. Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay. It is. But it's like the inner sanctum of this thing, and they practice in these underground chambers, carrying all sorts of rituals. Wilkes, before assigned to put down the Gordon riots, he gives testimony because somebody discovers that there's human sacrifices going on, and he's part of the cover-up campaign saying, "Oh, there's not sacrifices. There were just animal sacrifices, and oh yeah, we were like practicing the Eleusinian mysteries." The rights of Eleusinian.
Like the people who covered, who like tried to exile Alex and shut up Alex Jones.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Sorry, so, yeah. Go on. I'm just pointing out there's nothing new under the sun. Yeah.
No, there's a lot of parallels to our current situation. Yeah. So this guy is a key figure. Again, his children go on to become a big part of the growing pro-British deep state apparatus in the Confederate South in the United States. Gordon, like I mentioned, once he's exiled after this thing, he spends a little bit of time in the Tower of London. Then he gets put into exile. He goes to the Netherlands, which gives him a sanctuary, where he becomes a Kabbalistic rabbi named Israel Bar Abraham. And all of a sudden, he's like an occultist who becomes somehow inserted as an occult advisor to Marie Antoinette. By 1786, he's now in France advising the royalty on matters of like, what do the spirits want you to do from like whatever, I don't know. So, and then when Marie Antoinette is set up in the Cagliostro affair with the Queen's necklace, like all of a sudden, like there's a big campaign to like kill her and her husband because they're not playing by the rules of the game. He ends up becoming one of the key accusers, accusing Marie Antoinette or launching slanders and gossipy slanders, but that are used to stoke the fires of the mob to demand her head be cut off, which happens. So you got these weird networks, right? This is happening in England first, years before they set the stage for France. The other thing I want to say here is that in 1783, a peace deal is kind of signed between the Americans and the British, right? It's called the Treaty of Paris, and it's happening in Paris. The British don't actually show up, but they sign. They say, okay, the war's over. But coming with that, the French also signed a deal, and another deal with England in 1783 and then 1786 for free trade with England. And this is done by this guy, Jacques Necker, a Genoese oligarch who's made finance minister of France, who's pro-British. He's pro-Bentham. He's one of Bentham's assets in France. And what he does with this free trade deal, it's kind of designed to economically destroy France, just as like the British free trade is always calculated to not create free trade, but to open up to shut down the sentinels of whichever country you want to rape and pillage. And so what they do is they make it illegal under this for France to hold grain reserves, because all of a sudden you're breaking the rules of the markets by trying to hoard grain in case there's like a drought. That's illegal to hoard grain. Now you have to satisfy, you have to sell it. If there's a demand for people to pay a certain price, then you have to sell it by law. They did the same thing with the Irish when they wanted the Irish to starve to death. Same thing. Irish were producing enough food to sustain the Irish in the 1840s, but the British said, no, you sign free trade deals, you have to export, and they starved under gunboats. So same thing with France. Their economy was destroyed from 1783 until 1788. Totally undermined. Textiles from France were undermined. Raw materials were extracted to Britain that had the monopoly over industry, because Britain always allowed itself to have protectionism, just no one else. So that's to grow their manufacturing.
This is the same lie behind when we when we had the Tariff Act, and then we had the Federal Reserve Act. We changed over from tariffs to income tax.
Yeah, exactly. You got revenue in a different way. Yeah. Now, the taxes were originally, if they're done well, protective tariffs are a super good thing because it allows you to defend yourself. But if it's done dishonestly, it can be destructive too. Yes. So, let's go back to the. No, not yet. Not yet. So, at a certain moment, because of this destruction of the economy, as soon as there was, in this case of France, a bad crop because it was an overly cold climate one winter. Crops were like half the harvest. A lot of starvation. People were dying on the streets. That was the time to strike. And so all of a sudden, it sped things up quite a bit. And that's where Benjamin Franklin's allies had to work fast to try to get control of this. When people can't feed their families, they go crazy. And there's a lot of like zeitgeist bad energy building up. And that could be harnessed, which is what the Tennis Court Oath was all about, was like trying to race fast to get that American revolutionary spirit to be there when the mass energy was going to be put into motion. But inversely, those who were the ones creating the mass anarchy were also intent to redirect that weaponized mob in their benefit against the entire edifice of the state in order to break it down into, forever wars, right? Which is what ended up happening. So let's go back to the French Revolution. So yeah, thank you. All right. So let me just go here to the next slide. Something I want to show, jumping back to the present, French opening games at the Olympics. You had this weird Dionysian character or Bacchanalian character at a feast being served up as food as he's singing, "Let's all get naked. We're all equal if we're naked," with little children dancing with obviously like old people or older people. You had Snoop Dogg running around strangely with a torch. Some people said it was a reference to the Da Vinci Last Supper rendition. The organizers of the Olympics said it's not that. It's actually the Feast of the Gods of Apollo and Dionysius. Yeah. I would say it's both.
Both, yeah, I would agree. I would agree.
And either way, it's bad. It's equally bad in both cases.
Well,
and if it's,
I think it's kind of like putting the messaging of the Feast of the Gods of Apollo and Dionysius into the Last Supper, which mocks the Last Supper. So it's
And the Gnostics believe that Jesus was Dionysius, that he was the soothsaying god of the vine. That was the real Jesus of the. If people want to read the secret teachings of Jesus very valuable to own this is the Secret Book of James, Secret Gospel of Thomas, Secret Book of Thomas, and Secret Book of John. Those are part of the Nag Hammadi scriptures.
Okay.
That they didn't discover after World War II. That was fake. They've known about the secret gospels and Nag Hammadi scriptures for all this time. I'm 100% convinced of that. It's just that they made it public as part of their new wave of initiating the masses into what only the perverted elite were allowed to know for most of human history, right? So all that to say, going back to this this slideshow, they believe in the Jesus there is actually more of a Luciferian Jesus. It's not the Jesus of the public scriptures.
Right.
And so Apollo Dionysius
Not
is what
Christ, not Jesus
No.
Christ.
No, it's a different thing.
Right.
Who had his own secret gospel for his lover, Mary Magdalene, who he gave a secret knowledge to in opposition to the rest of the disciples, and also John, his other secret favorite, probably for erotic reasons, that he gave it another secret gospel to, which is also why, by the way, the Templars had as their patron saint Mary Magdalene, which is not the Mary Magdalene of the Bible, of the public Bible, but it's always been the Gnostic Mary Magdalene who had babies with Jesus that were brought into France, right, in Lausanne, and then gave rise to the bloodlines of the royal families.
Da Vinci Code.
Huh?
Da Vinci Code.
Da Vinci Code stuff. It's Da Vinci Code is managed by the Quattro Coronati Lodge. So that story was popularized for a version for the plebes to normalize this crazy shit that they've been believing for two millennia, which does tie into Isis and the Temple of Isis in a couple of ways. So the Gnostics, and then the Knights of Malta, or before that they were called the Knights Hospitaller, which was the sister order to the Templars, had as their patron saint Saint John of Jerusalem, which is not the John of the Bible, but it's, again, I think it's the Gnostic secret. It's the secret book of John. It's the Gnostic John who received the secret teachings, right? And some Kabbalistic, just like the Jewish Kabbalists believe in the secret oral teaching of Moses given to him, only an initiated class had the stomach to understand, whereas the masses had to believe what's in the Torah. That's how they also, there's groupings in Islam as well that believe in the secret teachings of Muhammad that only the initiated can know. And you'll usually find those groupings working all together. They're all three Satanist groupings are all
suddenly all the religions agree with each other in the Gnostic framework.
Yeah, exactly. And there's like a bad way to agree with each other and a good way to agree with each other, because we can all agree that we all love our children and love God and want to just be good people and work with respect of each other's differences, but with common principles. And that's good. That's good ecumenicism. Then you got the bad ecumenicism, which is, exactly what we were just talking about, right? Yeah. Take the most degenerate mystical parts of everybody, diluted of any morality and reason, and then just call that like the new thing that we're all going to dance to. All right. So, that's the Feast of the Gods, Apollo and Dionysius, by a Dutch painter.
And just to insert here, it's worth for people to know, with the opening ceremony, with the the Dionysius rising, and in front of all the children, that is a hermaphroditic god to them. So that's part of that whole trans kind of initiation, I think, in the ceremony.
Oh, yes, it is. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and sitting at the table instead of Jesus is a Helios or Apollo. In Rome, he was called Helios and Apollo, but it's the solar deity. And then you got obviously the drunken bacchanalian god of Dionysius, and then you got Pan, the goat man, also a prototype for Satan, dancing around too. And again, the Apollo Dionysius concept is going to be very important in general to understand what's going on. So let me just keep on going here. All right. The other symbolism that I found was very useful and insightful is the severed bull's head at the ceremonies. That was very, very prominently displayed. Yep. So keeping in mind the Phrygian cap, the goat's head, the Snoop Dogg actually is going to be a meaningful thing too. Apollo Dionysius as the Feast of the Gods. All right. So we've got these symbolisms. What's being represented for those in the know? All right. To answer that, and again, this impacts the French Revolution, you have to be aware that in the ancient world, there were 3 dominant enemy cults that were oppositional to the early movement of Jesus. And all 3 operated under the cult of the emperor that was set up by Julius Caesar when he became emperor. And then, so all of a sudden you have the Pontificus Maximus or whatever. The idea is that the emperor is not just an emperor, but it's like a pharaoh. All of a sudden, that Roman emperor is not a consul anymore, like it was under the Roman Republic. But now a deified human, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they had a whole story built up around Aeneas's story that they did as sort of a cult religion for the new empire that would abandon its republican roots. And it was based on the idea of these twins, Romulus and Remus, that was suckled by wolves, but that have direct connections to a divine being. Anyway, so they had a whole like mythical story to justify their own idea that the God man, that the Roman emperor sanctions all of the subcults that will be permitted to operate within the Roman Empire as a whole. And he would be advised by things like the Committee of 15, which was an elect committee of augurs who would be the only ones allowed to interpret the Sibylline oracles or the Sibylline books, which themselves were books that were sold by the Cumaean Sibyl when she sold them to Tarquin of Rome, the last king, who was a very bad king who was deposed of. But he bought a bunch of these oracles, as the story goes, and they were the official documents for about a millennium, from 500 BC until they were destroyed in 390 or so by Stilicho and Theodosius II. So, but for what they were is essentially the transcriptions of the utterings of the doped up priestess at Delphi, who was channeling, as the story goes, the messaging from the god of Apollo when she was high as a kite on psychedelics, and her utterings were being interpreted by the priests and written down, and she would give advice to kings and generals on who to go to war, who Apollo wants you to go to war with, or whatever. So that's how the system was sort of baked in as it was taking over from the East into Greece. And some of the transcriptions were, as they say, infused into the early Rome, called the Sibylline books. So she was a Sibylline oracle, a Sibyl. And the committee of, sometimes it was 25, sometimes 15, but this committee of augurs of Rome would advise the Senate, would advise the emperor on what decisions to make according to how you read these sort of like I Ching like books. You just open up the random mutterings, they're written down, and they were destroyed and rewritten a few times over too. So it's very like telephone game. And they would all be very cryptic language, so that you could interpret things in a million ways, like reading Nostradamus. It's n'importe quoi, as they say in French. So, but that would be how they would control the minds and the policies of the people. It's also like how Alan Greenspan was. That's why he was called the Oracle of Wall Street, right? The Oracle Greenspan, because he's the only one who could read the tea leaves. That was AKA these hyper complex derivative formulas in the markets. But the reason why he could read them is because he was part of the Trilateral Commission apparatus that was artificially shaping the economy,
manipulating them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So of course you can like tell the future if you're the one.
If you plan it, yeah,
exactly. Okay, so for the sake of the French Revolution and the Paris Olympics and the broader story of our society, including what's currently happening, so the 3 dominant cults were the cult of Cybele Attis, the cult of Mithra, and the cult of Isis. This is sort of a Smithsonian-styled website just covering some of that. Cybele, Isis, and Mithra, the mysterious cult religion in ancient Rome. They were kind of 3 separate religions with 3 different kinds of temples, but they were all parts of this. They were all parts of one thing. So this website is correct. It's not an error that they said the mysterious cult religion singular. They are aware that they're one religion, and it is. There's actually a book called The Gnostic Religion, written by Heidegger's disciple, who appears to be a part of this thing, which is a very useful book to read.
Which book is this?
The Gnostic Religion.
Oh,
I forget the name of the author. I'll send you a link.
Yeah, please.
I just started reading it. It's fantastic.
Ooh.
And
I wrote my college thesis, on Heidegger and Sartre, And Heidegger is like my favorite person to hate. So,
oh yeah, this is gonna make him even probably. It's gonna add another dimension to that too. Yeah, thrownness. Who fucking thrownness bullshit? Just stop being Nazi. Fight the Nazis. Like, okay, so, okay. Short breakdown. Cult of Cybele Attis that was imported into Rome via Anatolia in 204. Why? Because the Sibylline Oracle said, or somebody who interpreted the Sibylline books said, Sibylline Sibyl, not Sibyl Ybele, different.
Okay.
But similar. I mean, but the Sibylline oracle readers or interpreters gave this prophecy to the Roman Senate saying, if you bring in this new cult from Anatolia, this Phrygian cult, you'll win your war against Hannibal in the Second Punic War. And they did it. They brought it in. It was brought in by a guy named Fabius Maximus, who was the guy who brokered that. Now, Fabius Maximus, for those who might be listening and be like, I heard of that name.
Inspiration for the Fabian Society.
Yeah. So he's a leading oligarch from a high-level patrician family, very, very toxic character, but he innovated a new way of fighting, utilizing, attrition, infiltration, patience, which was very effective. And they attributed the victory of against Hannibal ultimately to bringing in Cybele. What you have there is several renditions of Cybele and Attis. So it's the Cybele and Attis. She had a counterpart, a male counterpart named Attis, who was a very demasculated male brother, husband figure, whom, as the story goes in the myth, fell in love with a mortal, even though he was supposed to be, she wanted him for herself. And then at the wedding ceremony, she comes in storming and raging, and he's so petrified, he runs like a little bitch into the forest, and in his hysteria, self-mutilates, cuts off his genitalia and bleeds out, dies. And then she begs Zeus to bring him back, which he does in the form of like some symbolic tree or a pine that grows out of itself. So that becomes also the origin of the Christmas tree. Is like the reincarnation, the rejuvenation of Attis. That's how, and they started utilizing their worship of Attis partially through that. And that's a picture also of an effeminate Attis, just sort of leaning on a head of, I think it's, I'm not going to say which god that is because I'm not too sure. One thing to be aware of is that Attis is wearing a Phrygian cap, right? That's actually what he's wearing. For those who wanted to be members of this cult, if you were a male member, because it was much more the feminine energy dominant cult, right? Is that you had to, if you want to be a hierophant, as they call it, you had to go into a state of ecstasy, an altered state. Drugs were used. All three practiced the Eleusinian mysteries, the rites of Eleusis. All three did, which is a graded 8 grade, as far as we know, initiation system involving psychedelic drugs. Brian Murescu did a book on the religion with no name recently, which is popularizing this. Joe Rogan is popularizing this. Graham Hancock is popularizing this revival of the Eleusinian mysteries. Yeah. And they were utilizing plant wheat blight, aka what became LSD. They were already using that in the ancient world. Probably some funguses as well, like early mushrooms and opiates to get the altered states. But what you would also do is you'd cut off your balls and your penis if you were a man. You'd have to do that as part of the bloodletting and the transformation into an androgynous sort of Attis-like an effeminized character. And you'd have to walk around with a falsetto voice, wearing women's clothing as a hierophant. That's what was done by all of the priests, and that's also why this cult, after a few years, was kicked out of Rome by the Roman families, because they still had enough wits to say, thousands of our young men are cutting off their genitalia, and Rome was still sort of prizing having families. There's still something in the Roman Republic that didn't go crazy, so they were able to shut down the cult. But it just went underground. It ended up getting a revival under Caligula and Nero a little bit later. It had a coming out party, but so it went underground. But it was still a very, very important, powerful cult. Again, just to be reminded, Phrygian caps, right? One of the other ways that you worshipped at this cult was through the Toraborium. I misspelled Toraborium. Anyway, That's basically the murdering of a bull. So they had to bleed out a bull and then decapitate the bull, and what the Hierophant priest overseeing this thing would have the bull's blood dropping onto him during his ceremony. That's an image, a bas relief of one of the Hierophants, and as you can see there, they are dressed in women's clothing. One thing that caught my eye here is the whip of knuckle bones for self-flagellation. That's an important concept, because that becomes very important for the new Gnostic rebranding after these mystery cults are banned from Christendom after the battles at Nicaea. They're forced to they suffer a defeat, and they have to both go underground and in some cases rebrand in pseudo-Christian costumes, which involved the Benedictines that brought back self-flagellation. So the idea was every time you have a bad thought, a hedonistic thought or whatever, you have to beat yourself. So it became like a culture of shame, of guilt, of self-enforced guilt, which is a perfect culture for the oligarchy, because it creates a dichotomized broken people, right? You can't grow as a person if you're always living in enforced shame and guilt all the time.
Yeah, I think in modern times, I mean, this was the role of Freud.
Yeah, Freud definitely brought this back. Yeah, and convinced everybody that it's our nature to want to have sex with our mom and kill her dad. And I mean, that's our nature. You can't break out of that. So you just have to live thus with that sort of shameful dirtiness is somehow a new identity for everybody. It's like, what the anyway, yeah. So, okay. That's quick intro to the cult of Cybele Attis. Oh, what I didn't say too is that Cybele's other incarnation is Demeter. She's also Rhea. If people watch The Warrior Nun on Netflix, it's a new series. I just watched it with Cynthia. The whole thing is a Gnostic revival with Rhea and a Luciferian Jesus. It's all there. If people want to get the sense of that, they could just watch things like that and get a sense of it. But I'd recommend reading the Gnostic scriptures.
And the Demeter, that whole story is I saw that very much as the whole Gaia religion, right?
That's it is. She's an Earth Mother, a Magna Mater, Earth Mother deity. Yeah, that's Gaia. That's right. And the story is, her daughter was Persephone. Cybele's daughter, Demeter's daughter, is Persephone. Gets killed, goes to the underworld into Hades, and she has to go down to try to, pull her daughter back out. And anyway, that's part of the die to be reborn initiation ceremony. They've got different variations on the theme, but it's always the same thing. You got to create a situation where the initiate goes into hell, into the land of the dead. Drugs help, and then they come back as a new person, and now they're totally other directed, as one might say. You're not directed by your internal conscience. You're now totally other directed by the sacred myths that have been infused into you through altered states that you participated in willfully, and now you're an automaton effectively. You can regain your humanity, but it's not easy.
Right. The new rendition of Beetlejuice has a lot of these themes.
Oh yeah. It's everywhere in the pop culture, but yeah, Tim Burton is big time into that. And yeah, I don't want to go into a side note, but so, and Demeter, Cybele, Rhea, Demeter specifically is the harvest goddess. They're all harvest goddesses, which is also the goddess of the Eleusinian mysteries, because it's in the wheat blight that you had the sacred hallucinogenic trip, right? So that's part of the cocktail that they would give to their initiates was something to do with the wheat blight, aka proto LSD.
Right.
So my new documentary,
ayahuasca too. Yeah,
ayahuasca is a variation of the same thing. And yeah, in the new documentary that Cynthia and I just released yesterday as a little shameless self-promotion, we go deep into this stuff as part of understanding what's behind the new UFO religion. So yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let's get back to it.
Yes.
Oh yeah, there it is right there. Yeah. That's the picture. If people are looking for it, that's what the cover looks like. Hidden Hand Behind UFOs. Yeah, New Age of the Sorcerers. Okay, so let's go back to the okay.
Cult of Mithra.
So we saw Cybele Atis cult. Okay, the other anti-Christian cult brought into Rome was the cult of Mithra. And again, you can see the Phrygian cap. It was a Phrygian cult brought in. Or it had different incarnations earlier on when it was in Iran. It didn't have the bull in Iran, but before that, they say it was in India and it had a very different incarnation, but it kept on getting rebranded as it moved west. And by the time it was brought into Rome, it was around 55 BC or so. I read that it was Pompey who was responsible for bringing this in. I'm not really too sure if it was him or Julius Caesar. But it was a male-only one. So unlike the cult of Cybele, which was much more feminine-oriented, they did, night revelries, Apollo Dionysian ceremonies. So Apollo during the day when you whip yourself for having bad thoughts, Dionysius under the moonlight, where you do the sacred orgies with the drugs and the altered states. That was the way that they carried out their sacred rituals. The same sort of thing was done, except the cult of Mithra, being male only, was much more geared toward the Praetorian Guard and the legions. So when people would do their kind of like Sunday service, the family would go, the men would go to the cult of Mithra, which were worshipped in underground Mithraeum, only in caverns. The caverns themselves would typically be metaphorical. As far from Mircea Eliade, who's a big fascist occult academic, as well as Franz Couman, who I've been reading a lot of their works. It seems like, and Couman was also evil, but useful. They're like some of the bigger occult academics, scholars who, did a lot of work on this stuff. They seem to have a consensus that the underground Mithraeum represent the womb of the earth, the womb of Gaia, which is the most sacred place to be. Right. And they were typically built where you'd have like a Cybele temple above and a Mithraeum below. And there's a statistically high correlation of both temples being found together today, around all over Europe, in North Africa, and the Holy Land. So what else were they doing? So looking at these various images of Mithra, he's always typically, or not always, but he's very frequently looking over his right-hand shoulder to Helios, who's overseeing his murder of the bull. Again, you have the Toriborium as part of the ritual. On the other side, you typically have an expression of Rhea, Demeter, or a lunar deity. There's a variety of names. I think Venus might be one of them. Overlooking the other direction. So this is what you do. It's while worshiping the goddess of the moon at night that you do things you don't want to think about. So you're typically looking at the Apollonian side of yourself that you want to be projected, the dutiful part of yourself, the stoic that you want to be projected as publicly. But then at night, you don't want to look at the thing that you really are, which is the beast, right? So again, there's thousands of these little things, and they found so far about 400. There's actually a movement called the New Mithraeum to revive this, the cult of Mithra. They've got an interactive map.
Didn't Jung do that already?
Huh?
Didn't Jung do that already?
Well, he initiated the making this public again, but now it's more. It's like MK Ultra after 75, right? Like now it's gone normie.
Got it. Okay.
So these are just like some of the locations of where they found these underground Mithraeum around the world. You can go to their website and check it out, play around on Google Maps. Here's a few more samples of some of the Mithraeum that they found. Again, there's no scriptures, so you have to sort of adduce through the imagery, the symbolism, what was going on, how they worshipped. Very secretive. Again, graded by rates of initiation. The Templars were largely a Mithraic, because it was super soldiers. The idea was you create a romantic idea of special legionnaires, special knights with higher powers that they procured through their drugs and sex rituals and other things, probably murder, right? The merging of of opposites, the merging of good and evil, the merging of the sacred and the profane, all have to, that's part of what they do. Yeah. So it seems like there were whistleblowers from the Templars who made it known that there were certain sacrificial things to a god known as Baphomet that Eliphas Levi carried out a rendition of. That doesn't seem to be objected to by modern Templars. Everybody seems to agree that is an important deity. Aleister Crowley, the modern Templars, everybody's like, Yeah, it's an androgynous god of Baphomet. Even though they say, oh yeah, the Templars were unjustly taken down by a greedy king of France and the Pope who just didn't want to pay their debts to the Templars, who were the controllers of like all of the world banking during the Crusades, right? But anyway,
I've heard that many times. Yes.
yeah, and they tend to also like worship in underground caverns in under Solomon's temple, the Solomon's mines, where their headquarters in Jerusalem, where they were carrying out the rituals. There's a variety of Templar caverns even today that have been discovered. I've got a picture of one of them. That's just a artist's rendition of the Templars being burnt, Jacques de Molay and others in 1312. That's them, a picture of or a drawing of them worshiping Baphomet. Again, Baphomet is multiple, pointing at an eclipsed moon and eclipsed sun with one hand, right hand, left hand paths, right? Again, very important imagery there. The Pentagon, goat's head, female body merged with a man's body, phallic symbol wrapped with snakes, goat's feet, a la Pan, another important idea. So, yeah. So
So now we have Kamala tells us we can be unburdened by what has been. And she does this.
Oh, she did that thing? She did the thing?
She does it all the time. Every time she says it, we can be unburdened by what has been. She always does that. It's this hand up here and this hand down here. I don't think that's a coincidence, because I've seen like that, clipped together montage of 4 minutes of her doing that over and over again every time. It's some variation of this and this.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. That's shady. All right.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's good to keep in mind. All right. So the Templars, just to be reminded, because this is going to come back into play in the French Revolution. The French Revolution and the Olympics,
right?
Especially Snoop Dogg. So they were responsible for overseeing the secret society. Was responsible for transforming Christianity into a weaponized apparatus to justify a new age of forever wars against the Muslim world and also against the Jews. Because along the way in the First Crusade, several Jewish towns were razed. The Christ killers were all destroyed by these new fanatic crusaders, who were organized around a mystery cult. Again, Mary Magdalene, all that stuff was not the same Magdalene that we think about from the Bible. Right. And it was a total bloodbath. Millions of Christians and Muslims murdered along the way. Christians killing Christians as well. And the Templars were the sister order to the Hospitallers. Right, both of them were spawned out of a Benedictine operation. I mentioned earlier that the Benedictines, founded in 1524 by a Roman patrician, Benedict, and his twin sister Scholastica, both of whom built their early Benedictine temples on temples of Apollo. Their bodies were famously placed into an Apollonian shrine. So it was a solar deity, solar cult that brought in also self-flagellation, and had an esoteric and exoteric teaching order, right? So there's a lot of good people who are Benedictines who just like the Bible, and then for those who had the right stuff were tapped on the shoulder and were given the secret teachings along the way, as is always the case. So it was Benedictine grand strategists that seeded both of these orders, one from Amalfi, which created the what became the Knights of Malta. One was male, one was female sort of dynamics. Their objective was to rebuild Solomon's temple. That's why their headquarters was under Solomon's, today's Dome on the Rock. They were also, and so that's a picture of the Kingdom of Jerusalem at its maximum extent. I think after the Second Crusade, it grew to that scale. It endured for about 2 centuries. This is what Alex Jones has actually promoted bringing back as a solution to the Middle East crisis is the Templar kingdom of Jerusalem. So you've got this weird thing with a lot of Catholic mystics being brought in who like use certain useful idiots like Russell Brand, Mel Gibson, who's popularizing the Knights of Malta in a new Netflix show. Candace Owens and her husband, they're all like, it seems, useful idiots as part of this invocation ceremony.
Yeah, I'm not sure how how much they're useful idiots or how much they actually know. I think they're.
I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I
But
know.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I don't know either.
Yeah,
I get a bad feeling, but I'm giving
yes,
them the space.
yes. I did that this morning actually, and someone was like, "Why wouldn't you? Why would you just assume that they didn't understand? Couldn't it be duplicitous and maybe that it's intentional?" And I was like, I was trying to be nice,
Yeah.
Ignorance and stupidity are a nicer way to frame this. So,
Well, they're ignorant of something no matter what. Even if
yeah.
people are doing evil, they're ignorant about something about themselves. So no matter what, we could still say,
Yes.
forgive them. They know not what they do.
Yes.
Even yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and another character at the opening ceremonies that I thought was interesting that was there throughout the whole thing was this character that was a takeover from Assassin's Creed, the popular video game, who represents a Hashashin assassin bouncing around. The Hashashins, by the way, was an order created by I want to say Hassan al-Banna, but I feel like that's the wrong name. I forgot the name, but anyway,
I'm blanking too. I know exactly who you're talking about. Hopefully it'll come to me.
I forgot the Old Man of the Mountain. Anyway, it was an order created in 1090 as a Gnostic hybrid.
Is it the Wabi something?
Oh, that's Al-Wahhab who came later.
Okay.
But that's a whole no. The Wahhabites came out of the teachings of Al-Wahhab, which was several centuries, way more.
Okay.
I think 17th century, 18th century. No, this is here. You know what? I got my little notebook. I'll just get it here. It's right here. It's useful enough to know. It's important enough to know. I think. It's a cult of Nizari Ismailis who believed. It's the Albana Sufis that helped the Albana Gnostic Sufis, but it's not Albana, it's another guy. Anyway, I'll get it later. So these Sufi, this order of the Hashashins were a cult of assassins. They had the same colors as the Templars. They colluded with the Templars, and I think that they, according to this book by this guy James Wasserman, it's called The Templars and the Assassins.
Okay.
Very useful book. Now, the guy himself is a friend of Michael Aquino, a Satanist. He's a member of the Ordo Templi Orientis.
Okay.
So anytime he makes a value judgment about anything, just assume that the very opposite is true, but he's looking at all the right things. Very useful book.
Okay.
And he makes a point that it was these Hashashins who were working with the Templars to carry out assassinations of mostly Muslim leaders who were trying to broker peace with the Christians. And the Templars were also working to undermine peace as well because they wanted a different type of policy forever. Both of them had grades of initiation. The Hashashins were also a drug cult, so that's where the name Hash, like they would basically get high on hash to get into an altered state before being deployed to go and kill a target. Whole story there. So the fact that you have this character chosen by the Olympics, whatever committee is arranging the Olympic ceremonies, is interesting. Carrying the torch, keeping in mind what we just saw. And also, why did I bring up Snoop Dogg? Because Snoop Dogg was there at the Olympic ceremonies with his favorite necklace. And as he was carrying this torch, passed on to him by the Hashashin, if you take a look, you zero in on what this necklace is, he was representing Baphomet. So that's actually him in his Olympic garb on the right, and that's him close up with the Baphomet necklace. Again, to what degree he understands what he's a part of, I have no idea. But he was there to fulfill a certain role in the play.
Sure.
The last, and I think most important cult that I didn't talk about yet is the cult of Isis and Serapis, which is Isis is the mother of Horus. This is a variation brought in from Egypt.
Yes. And
it was imported in 200 BC, 4 years after the cult of Sibyllatus was imported. So was this one imported at the end of the Second Punic War. And that's a couple of pictures of them. It was very much a Scythian cult, a cult of Pythian cult. So you had this idea of the hypnotic power of the snake, the serpent, that was imbued within their ceremonies. Isis was amongst other things the goddess of good navigation, which we'll keep in mind. Serapis was also a god of death, involved, different stories associated with going into the land of the dead and coming back again. So you get this type of thing everywhere. Okay, let's jump back to the present situation now. Okay,
I do have a question for you,
Yeah.
because this has come up several times. Do you know the difference between like the Eye of Horus and the all-seeing eye?
No, they're the same thing.
That's what I thought too. I've been told that that's incorrect, that they have different, and that one's the left eye, one's the right eye, and they have different meanings. But
that's a degree of nuance I'm not aware of. So if you find anything about that, let me know.
I will. All right.
Okay. So before proceeding back to the Olympics,
yes,
Isis is one of, I think, I've been reading through the 2-volume Isis Unveiled by Madame Blavatsky. The Isis cult
bless you. That's hard.
It's rough. It's rough reading.
I've read parts of it, and I honestly have a very hard time like continuing. It's dark, and I like put an excerpt of it on Twitter, and that got me like censored. But
yeah, and just so people know, I mean, these things are like big, right? Like
they're huge. Yeah, it's like 1800
things, right? So
one volume.
This is volume 1 and 2, and frankly, I'm never going to read all of these. I'm not, but I'm trying to read through the most essential stuff that I find is important. And she's very clear that the time has come to do a full coming out party of the cult of Isis.
Yeah,
big part of their thing. The animal and probably human murder rituals, a big part of the ceremonies of the esoteric elite. So the esoteric section of the ceremonial magic of the Theosophists, the esoteric section as they call it, was probably carrying out some human sacrifices. As you and I discussed last time I was on your show, the whole Jack the Ripper Whitechapel murder operation was totally part of a tantric ritual to revive Isis. That needed these anyway, people can watch that last episode. So why am I saying this? So the thing about England and France is they were 2 Isis hubs of the ancient Roman order. Isis, this is where in England, so on the right hand side, flanked by 2 sphinxes, is what's called Cleopatra's Needle. This is on the River Thames. Now, for most of human history, it wasn't called the River Thames, and even today, amongst the cult circles, it's still called the River Isis.
My mind was blown when you told me that. I still I say it all the time, like, whoa, did you know that? That was mind blowing to me.
And that building behind it, I believe it's that building that was the apartment of Mabel Collins, who was part of the esoteric section of Blavatsky, and she was the one watching this building of this obelisk brought in from Egypt. And installed there in, I think, the early 70s. And she started getting visions of men in robes going around doing ceremonies, who would end up walking into her bedchamber and doing ceremonies on her, which is where she channeled these messages that came out in the form of her books on the Isis and the Idyll something, the Blossom and the Idyll, and another work which Aleister Crowley said inspired him to create Thelema, and his doctrine of Thelema was Mabel Collins. She was also part of what the operation to replace Madame Blavatsky with Annie Besant is another aspect of what Mabel Collins was doing as a witch. She had her own coven too with the Jack the Ripper guy who we talked about. So all that to say, that's the River Isis, which exists next to an ancient temple of Isis, which has been torn down, but it was big in the Roman Empire, and it was apparently there during the Claudian invasion. I've got a book here, Caesar's Invasion of Britain. So when Julius Caesar first tried to invade Britain, it was a Celtic culture that had already brought in Isis as a field of worship from Egypt in Celtic Britain. This is like 55 BC or so. He tried, he failed. But when the Claudian invasion happened in 45 AD, they were successful at turning Britain into Londinium. So Britain became part of the Roman Empire. Londinium became the ISIS capital. They kept the Temple of Isis in place. That became the hub. Now in France, it was a little bit earlier. So France, as far as I could tell from my research, that's one of the obelisks next to the Eiffel Tower in the background there. Now Paris,
which kind of looks a little like an obelisk.
it kind of does. Yeah, I wonder if that may not be a coincidence, but yeah,
I don't know. I'm
mental
just
note.
noticing. Yeah.
Yep. Now this was created. The earliest we could see was Julius Caesar in France. There was a town called Lutetia next to the River Seine. That Lutetia was the center of Celtic Isis worshippers who had been there already for quite some time. So there's some connection between the Celts, the Druids, right, of the Celtic world of Britain at the time, and ISIS and Egypt. There's a connection that they've been suppressing that, but that's a thing. There's a good or a bad aspect to that, because I do think that there's actually a good, like a humanist fight within Egypt, even within the ancient mysteries, against this evil thing. And I think I could find the same thing or evidence of that also in the ancient Celtic world as well, which people like the real King Arthur of the 6th century was a part of the good side of it, and the Book of Kells and all that stuff. But that's a whole other conversation that I haven't properly understood yet. But I just don't want people to oversimplify this as all one thing or another, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Now this Lutetia at the River Seine as a town became renamed officially Paris or Paris by Julian the Apostate in 360. That's the same Julian the Apostate that promised the Jews he would rebuild Solomon's temple. And he was the last one to try to really seriously revive officially Mithra, Cybele, Isis as cults against Christianity in 360. Important concept. So Para-Isis is from Isis, the followers of Isis, and that's where Paris got its name. Clovis, the first Christianized Clovis the First of the Merovingians, who sort of consolidated the post-Roman Empire world after he had made some deals with leading Roman priests of the patrician class. They basically said, okay, Clovis, you're the guy. It could have been the leaders of the Ostrogoths or some other Nordic sect. They were like, no, Clovis, the Franks, we'll give it to you. Now, Clovis was him and his family, even after they became nominally Christian, were still known as the sorcerer kings. That's important too. They're always the sorcerer kings. That's who Charlemagne's grandpa overthrew in a brilliant positive maneuver. And you and I, we did a show on Khazaria, and the Charlemagne network with Harun al-Rashid. People can go into the archives and watch that if they want that story of the overthrow of the Merovingians. But it's the Merovingians that the Gnostics believe or promote were the conduits of the blood of Jesus through the babies he had with Mary Magdalene, through France, through the Merovingian bloodlines and onward to current families. And things like the Priory of Zion, also popularized in the Da Vinci Code and Holy Blood, Holy Grail. We're a secret society to manage and maintain the secret of Jesus's true magical bloodline, right? Which again, in their mind, Jesus equals Lucifer.
Right.
If
you're reading the Secret Doctrine, I mean, Madame Blavatsky makes that really clear. I mean, she says God is Satan, God is Lucifer. And she talks about that's part of why she's like diametrically opposed to Christianity, is because they misinterpret who the real God is. So
yeah. And so does Albert Pike in his Morals and Dogma as well, which is another really useful one. You don't want to read the whole thing, but there's a lot of useful stuff in Morals and Dogma, where he's also very actually, no, it's not so much in Morals and Dogma that he's so clear on that. It's in his letters to Mazzini that got.
Oh, I mean, Mazzini is like a godfather of all of these cults.
Oh yeah.
Mazzini's
super toxic guy. And that's where Albert Pike is saying, Lucifer is God, and Adonis, the God of the Old Testament, he's also God. They were both gods. And so we have to worship both the light and the darkness equally in some Manichaean weird blah blah blah. So yeah, that's what they do. So let's again follow Dionysus, right? That's the formula. So let me just pull up here another thing. Before getting back to the French Revolution. That's New York obelisk as well, from Egypt, from Luxor. We
Crazy. I mean, until recently, I never really thought about it, but it's everywhere.
Yeah, and here in the Washington Monument as well, that was part of the Masonic takeover of the Republican Masonic lodges when those were being purged in the 1830s. The celebration for the purging of the humanist lodges, like the good humanist lodges,
Right.
that I mentioned earlier, they celebrated it when they were infusing the Rosicrucian sort of Scottish Rite insanity into the thing. Was the creation of this Washington Monument to try to redefine Washington as primarily this secret Gnostic mystery cult figure. And as I mentioned in our last discussion, right, most of the people who were part of the selection team, and most because it was a contest to see who could come up with the best design for an honorarium to earn a memorial to Washington. They were like, why didn't we pick a sculpture of Washington or something? Like, I thought we were gonna have Washington riding a horse, and somehow they got this thing in there. And then later on they added the Vesca Pisces, the same thing in Rome too. In the 1540s they brought in the obelisk into St. Peter's Square, and they added the Vesca Pisces by Bellini, this hedonistic Neoplatonist sculptor. Very, like, he's basically an eroticist. Now, okay, so we've established here France, England, centers of the cult of Isis, Paris, especially Paris. I mentioned, okay, Bentham, who did like In Defense of Pederasty, Hedonism. This guy is like a disgusting piece of turd, but he was made honorary after the French Revolution in 1792, right before they banned Christianity. He was made an honorary citizen of France. And he said, I should think myself a weak reasoner and a bad citizen, were I not, though a royalist in London, a republican in Paris. Like, what a chameleon-like turd, right? Like, no principles. Just like, it's utilitarian. It's useful for me to act like a Republican, a revolutionary Republican in Paris, because he was writing. He had basically a salon manufacturing speeches for Robespierre, Danton, Maga, like these various rabble rousers, who were able to like flatter the mob and weaponize the mob to kill all of the qualified leaders. That was a lot of their speeches were being managed by Bentham, the champion of freedom. Oh, the other thing too to keep in mind is that the Jacobins, why were they called the Jacobins? Important concept. The Jacobins themselves of Marseille were writing to the Jacobins of Montpellier in October 1st, 1790, when the revolution was starting to really go downhill fast. They said, we can only applaud your project of corresponding with the friends of the revolution in England and with foreigners in Paris. We owe our union to these close-knit brothers who before us conquered their liberty. We have asked for affiliation and correspondence ourselves. They're very clearly pointing out that it's the English Jacobins, the English Revolutionary Party, that is really behind, and they want to try to model this new government that they're trying to create around the British legal system. Once they tear down the Bastille, which again was an inside job, like Necker and what's his name, the Duke of Orleans, who was the finance minister. Duke of Orleans was the third in line for after King Louis the 16th was killed. He wanted to be the Jacobin king. He wanted to be and he was the overseer of the Temple of Reason. Now he gave the command for the soldiers at the Bastille, the prison, to start shooting on the starving masses that were being herded to go and like storm the Bastille. It didn't have to happen, but they forced them to shoot in order for the people to then have an instigated reason to go and like storm it, free the prisoners, and cut off the heads of the prison guards that ushered in what's today Bastille Day. Now, when they tore down the prison, they built what was known in 1793. Here's an artist's rendition of it who saw it. Was the goddess Isis as Mother Nature. She regenerated elder delegates from all French regions by drinking her nourishing water that came out of her tits. Plutarch informed us that Isis is in fact the female principle of nature and is receptive of every form of generation. That's from Plutarch. So very much merged with the Gaia, Cybele, Rhea figure. And again, that's her being flanked, Isis being flanked by two cats. It's always Cybele too, of Attis, who's always flanked by two cats. So yeah, that was they ended up tearing this down, so we only have pictures and descriptions of it, but it's an important factor. The other thing is that they redesigned in 1790 the Paris coat of arms to feature, well, the three Bs were always there, representing I forget which family, but here they inserted Isis on the tip of this ship. So that was added to the coat of arms of France that formerly simply had the ship and the bees. Now it had the ship, the bees, and Isis as the navigation goddess. 1790.
Wow.
The other thing to keep in mind is that the Square du Temple, the medieval fortress in Paris, was built by the Knights Templar, and that fortress was used as a prison and torture chamber during the French Revolution. So that's where they were carrying out tortures and imprisonment during the French Revolution. Was a Templar castle. Notre Dame de Paris was also a Templar chapel, big one. It was built in I think the 12th, 13th century, and it was built directly on the former temple at Isis. The dominant temple of Isis is this exact location where the Templars chose to build their Notre Dame de Paris, our Lady of Paris. So at that point, who is Our Lady of Paris? Is it Mary? Because people say, oh, it's the Mother Mary. Well, I would say no, it's probably the Templar patron saint. It's the Mary Magdalene. They like the ambiguity of the two Marys, the sinner and the sacred, right? The mother, divine, pure mother, and the whore.
I was just going to say, Madonna whore. Yeah.
So they love that, and that's also what was burnt in 2019 in Quebec, where I live. It's got a deep Catholic history. There's been over 100 Catholic churches that have burnt down since 2021. So there's a mass yeah. So there's a mass ejaculation fest going on right now by paganists who are burning down these churches all over the place, as I think sort of like I think there's a bit of a celebration going on as part of this demonic coming out party. And Napoleon, also keep in mind, people say, oh, he was an anti-Masonic figure. No, Cynthia Chung has done an incredible, that's my wife, for those who don't know, but she's done a deep dive into the cult around Napoleon, the Masonic orders that brought in something super evil into France via Scotland, actually after the Templars were taken down. And like Napoleon's brother was Grand Master of several of the most influential lodges. His chancellor, his primary handler, was also like the most decorated Freemason in the world. Huge networks around Napoleon, who saw himself as a new Helios sort of solar deity himself, like a new Julian the Apostate figure. That's holding the earth, kind of like Charlemagne. So he's trying to like revive an evil version of the Charlemagnean unification of Europe with East and West. He had his whole a transformation of the church as well, the Gallic churches, around a French version of Anglicanism, which is what Henry the VIII had done earlier. So this is what the sorts of things he was doing. Now, he was also tapping into something that was already there because of Napoleon XIV had already established in the minds of the culture a corrupt idea of Apollo and paganism. And the cult of Helios in France was really taken to new levels or the biggest levels by Louis XIV, the Sun King. And that's him in his Helios Sun King garb as he was a ballet dancer. That's a few more images of him as the Solar King, with chariots and what have you. So that was already there. And, you've got things like the Temple of Apollo, the Shrine of Apollo at Versailles as well, which is a big thing. So all of this stuff, this was what was coming out and being celebrated in the French Revolution. This is what Napoleon was assigned to do as the the resolution to the false oppositions of left and right, Jacobins, Jourdains taking turns killing each other in the cult of reason versus the cult of the supreme being, one faith without reason, one reason without faith, both of them killing each other left, right. And then you had a vacuum that was filled by this creature who had a bunch of Martinist Freemason handlers as well, like Joseph de Maistre, who believed in, global sacrifices as God. This is the way they think of it, as God sacrificed his own son to save humanity, so too must we sacrifice our children to save and replenish humanity too. That's how these like these Gnostic, hard right Mithraic figures, that's how they rationalize their belief in mass ritual, global purgation or mass bloodletting, in order to have some like phoenix emerge out of the cleansing fires that you create. Which also brings up, through your research, what the hell Brett Weinstein is actually a part of, and Cynthia is doing a deep dive on this too, which is going to blow your mind. You guys are like doing some synergistic stuff right now.
Ooh, we'll have to do a show together. Yeah,
definitely. It's gonna, but the whole
is scary stuff. And when you, I don't want to take too much of a detour, but just when
that's it. I'm done.
Okay. But when you start looking at Brett Weinstein and Eric Weinstein, right? Eric Weinstein wrote that paper for the UN. He was working with the UN from 2000 to 2002, and he was working on what became the Great Migration theory.
Yeah,
and he wrote that. That's what is coming to fruition today. And he literally wrote that. And of course, he's part of the whole intellectual dark web that claims to be this counter to the globalist agenda. Meanwhile, he literally wrote arguably the cornerstone of the Great Reset agenda. And then you've got Brett Weinstein, who's part of Rescue the Republic. Now, I can't speak to Eric. I've never met him. I have met Brett, and I will just say, as a caveat, he's a very nice guy. He's a very bright guy. I have nothing against him personally, but it's a little questionable when he's part of all of these supposedly opposition to the global agenda. And then he's directly involved in working on Game B, which is literally like Maslow's Politics 3 and Robert Mueller's Planetix operation on steroids. And it's also directly what was done in Est. And I know because I did two of their offshoots, not Landmark, but they're more independent, whatever offshoot. And they literally do Game B theory. They do a whole exercise that is Game B. And this comes right out of Est, and sensitivity training and all of that. It's scary stuff. It's literally communist brainwashing is what it is. But only being applied to global technocracy and neo-feudalism. But
well, yes. And you might want to talk to actually, and Johnny Vedmore's work on this was great. I'm glad that you interviewed him too, because that blew my mind when he exposed Eric Weinstein and this stuff. And then Uwe Alschner, I'm going to introduce you to my buddy in Germany, Uwe, who's an amazing historian and writer, and he actually was one of the voices in our new documentary on the hidden hand behind UFOs. Okay. And he did a dive on Brett Weinstein too, which is complementary to this whole thing, and this Unity project that Robert Malone is a part of, the Unity movement. And he just looked at Brett Weinstein's speech that he delivered, which says, and Weinstein ended his speech saying, I ask you to think to the people, right? I ask you to think about the job we must do to phoenix our republic, the daunting obstacle in our path, Goliath, and the unity movement we bring to the battle, David. It is for such movements like that the Hopi elders tell us we are the ones we have been waiting for. And he says, Ben Franklin said, he has by saying, today, David and the unity movement face a similar question to that faced by Benjamin Franklin when asked, what have you given us, a republic, if you can keep it? He says, what we must deliver is a republic if we can phoenix it. What the hell are you saying? That's literally, I just verbatim, I didn't paraphrase. That was Brett Weinstein calling for the the American people to phoenix the republic to save it, burn it to save it. Got to burn the village to save the village. We've heard this before in Vietnam. It was part of what? Operation friggin' Phoenix. Yeah. Burn the village to save the village.
There's so many Phoenix references. So the Tampa like simulation of the hurricane that could be a disastrous, catastrophe, cataclysmic event. They did Operation Phoenix, and then they did it again. I think in 2009, it was Operation Phoenix 2.0. There's of course the CIA Operation Phoenix. Tavistock did an Operation Phoenix where they restructured their entire operation, and they did that. I think it was right after World I think it was right after World War II, or it might have been right before World War II. And then that's actually where they started doing all that research in World War II on the Operation War Office selection boards. And this is where they get their, recruiting process for change agents. And in Tavistock, they do call them change agents, but in the OSS, they don't call them change agents, but that's essentially what they are. And I'm pretty sure that's where that whole Mice to Rascals document came out of too. Yeah, but all of these Phoenix references, which is so tragic to me. My grandfather actually named his company Phoenix Beverages. I don't think he had any awareness of any of this occult referencing.
No, I mean the Phoenix is cool, right? It's a cool thing.
Yeah, it was after World War II, 1945, 1947. So I'm so convinced that this is where that Mice to Rascals document did come out of. They don't say that. You can find the Mice to Rascals document off the CIA website, but they do talk about how, it was psychological testing that led them to come up with this, these heuristics. But this was they talked about in the War Office selection boards. They talk about things like, they say they gave them an intelligence test, but when they explain what it meant for intelligence, it was much more about like mental adaptation. So people who could be easily groomed. I mean, yes, I'm sure they were looking for a certain level of aptitude and acuity, but it was more about who could be groomed and molded and trained. So interesting.
Can you say a bit more about this report as well? Because it's not something I haven't read that.
The Mice to Rascals?
Mice to Rascal, yeah.
Okay, so it's so MICE stands for money, ideology, coercion, and ego. And this was the old system that they claim they used to recruit assets. They do call it assets in the OSS. And they decided they needed they call it agent recruitment. Okay. So they decided that Rascals was a better acronym, and it was a better formula. And Rascals, so the R is for reciprocity. The A is authority. So what does it say? In particular, I will discuss the work of Robert Cialdini and how his 6 influence factors: reciprocity, authority, scarcity is the first S, then commitment and consistency, and then liking and social proof. And so this is where, of course, like anybody who's an influencer, quote unquote, they learn about social proofing. Like if you take these courses, they talk about social proofing as a way to recruit people and to build your audience and to build your credibility. And that they were literally, training that and teaching that through this OSS program.
Wow.
So yeah. And I just, because I had done a lot of research on Operation Phoenix and then the War Office selection boards, which was a whole project under Tavistock where they were trying to figure out how they could recruit leaders in the war. And of course, all of it's always done under wartime research where they have a Black Ops carte blanche budget. Yeah. So the psychiatrists are all given this assignment, but they use that with their discoveries and their research from that period. And I'm pretty sure that they do say that later became a intelligence agent recruitment process. They also talk about, because it's Tavistock, that they later extrapolated that for like organizational development and corporation leadership. So they brought it into the corporate culture, if you will. But yeah, it used to be money, ideology, compromise, and ego. And I still think they use that. Why do people spy? And I still think that is a very, the Cold War perspective is that section. They were using that in the Cold War, and they decided to change it over. But I still think they use that quite often. We see that all the time. And I think with all of these, I mean, you mentioned some of them, the Russell Brands, the Candace Owens, and Tucker Carlson, and I'm going to get myself in all sorts of trouble naming all sorts of names, but I can't prove. I don't know the direct influences, and I don't know who's funding them. I can't prove that, but what I can see is the impact. So to speak to some of what you're talking about with like the French Revolution and like the false right of that framework and that paradigm, so much of what we're seeing today, I see very reminiscent of that. It's that same kind of, a lot of them are post-liberal agents. They're advancing narratives that are in the post-liberal framework, but it looks to me just like a right-hand path of the very same thing that the left is doing. I mean, it's a subversive tactic. It's just that I think the left in many ways is easier because they do tend to be more inclined to a collectivist mindset. But they tend to lead with, like you said, the right was the cult of reason, and the left does tend to lead from a place of emotionality. That tends to be their their driver and their guidance for
my feelings are my truth, right? We all have, because we all have a relativistic experience of reality. Thus, there's infinite realities because there's infinite possible experiences, and so there's no truth. There's no reality at that point, right? Versus the other kind, which is like whatever bigoted view of reality I feel logically is supportable, I'm going to now enforce that one onto everything with no belief in reason, in proving why it's true, because you can't, because you just believe it. So you could say Hitler in that sense was a liberal. He was a Nietzschean Hitler. You could say in many ways he was a liberal.
Yeah.
Because he didn't believe in truth. He believed in his will to power in a Nietzschean world where his view of what is justice, what is right, became what he wanted to make hegemonic as onto everybody. And if you played ball, you'd get by okay. And if you wanted to speak up and disagree, you'd be burnt off the earth, right? And so that's the hegemony.
Exactly. And so I think the left, because they are, but it's easier to lead them through emotionality. I think they've been very successful in their active measures and their subversive tactics via the left. And I think, of course, now they have to work through the right to get the dialectical pole to turn, so they can achieve their synthesis towards their, so the right, though, what I'm seeing is that it is kind of this post-liberal type of movement, and it's a lot of these narratives where they all seem to be saying the same thing, and they're all speaking in this very the exoteric veneer of Christianese, as I call it. But I don't know, baptizing people in your whitey tighties, doesn't seem very Christian. I don't know, I could be wrong. I'm not super versed, but and Christ consciousness does not sound Christian at all. It sounds exactly like what Madame Blavatsky talked about, and many before her, from which she derived her ideas. So
absolutely, no, I agree. And it's ironic, like you look at this dark intellectual dark web thing, and they're bringing in certain. It's a breath of fresh air in some ways when you look at the toxicity of the banal like wokeism that's rampant and so crazy. It's clear. It's nice to see some like logic applied by these representatives. However, at the same time, all of them bring in their same commitments to a Darwinian interpretation of life, of evolution, that they try to like nest everything into. Carl Jung as well, who's an anti-Christian like pagan who's trying to like revive the Nordic Woden mystery cult and is channeling like demons like Abraxas and Philemon in his weird Mithraic ceremonies that he's talking about. This is the guy who's working with Alan Dulles, and
Yeah.
creating this like occult version of psychology or psychiatry or both.
Yeah.
Which is being brought in. And Cynthia is just reading through a bunch of Tavistokian books right now, making it very clear that these are all Jungians. They're
Yes.
utilizing Freud, but also especially Jung,
Yes.
to control the levers of society and create a new false zeitgeist that would have these different archetypes that would be easier for the handlers of the recipe book to manage the human stew of
Yeah.
like, here's this flavor here, we're going to create, here's this flavor that'll self-conglomerate here as a group dynamic. And then now we've got these simple structures that will self-control. Yeah. Social media is useful as far as like networking is concerned, to then like, you know, nudge things in one direction or another. And that's what Jordan Peterson is bringing in. Nietzsche, Brett Weinstein, Eric's like assigned to try to redefine science, because people could see that the popular science is crap. So they want like something a bit more realistic. So Eric Weinstein is coming in with his new theory, a new synthesis of everything, but that has no basis in any of the actual traditions of positive scientific discoveries. He's just cut it all out. No Kepler, no Leibniz, no Gauss, no Riemann, no Max Planck. It's all like somehow emerged out of this great guy's a genius, which again, it has certain assumptions that make it useful for the oligarchy to capture people who want a better truth, a bigger picture of the story, but it's just in a different kind of cage than the one that they were formerly in. So you're jumping from one cage to the other. And there's a cool picture there of Templars. What was that?
Of the Templars?
I don't know. There was a picture that I just saw as I was talking.
Oh, there. Yeah. Temple to ancient Roman cult resurrected beneath London.
Oh, yeah. That was kind of, yeah. You can go in and tour that thing.
Well, and to your point with Brett Stein, with Eric Weinstein, and you know, creating this new kind of theory of everything science. I mean, it's very in line with Game B. I mean, that's exactly what it's the whole collective stew, right? This is we're going to get rid of Game A is this idea of competition, and they say literally, they say we are as gods. Might we? Oh. We might as well be get good at it.
They just say it. Oh,
they just say it. I mean, it's literally right there. We are gods. Yeah.
Fucking Luciferians, eh? I mean, and like you said in your write-ups, this is like totally rooted in Barbara Marx Hubbard and the whole Luciferian agenda that took over the UN. It's entirely that. Oh yeah, Ilya Prigogine, the bad anti-entropy. Because it's true, like there is such a thing as anti-entropy in the universe. It's the universe is not entropic. Right. The way standard model science demands we assume the universe is dying down. The facts are that life in all higher states demonstrate that there is an opposing, more dominant force that the oligarchy has to try to control how people interpret that. So they got Prigozhin and others to say, okay, we'll allow for anti-entropy, but under the conditions that it is still something you can't understand within yourself. It's something that's still going to be controllable by a priesthood. E.O. Wilson. Oh yeah.
He's the half Earth guy. This is literally the guy who wrote the book about half Earth, and the half Earth agenda is, you know, the 30 by 30 land grab, the American Beautiful, right? That's only 30% of the 30% of the world's Earth waters and Earth can be inhabited by humans. Well, it's a stepping stone to half Earth, which is the idea that only half can be inhabited or utilized by humans, and that was E.O. Wilson, and in line with Eric Weinstein's whole theory of everything, it's and Game B is all tied to Kenneth Wilber too. Kenneth Wilber's whole 4 quadrants of integralism. I don't remember what each quadrant is. I could probably look it up, but
right. That's the holographic universe, nonviolent communication guy too, right? Like
that's right. Yeah. So
violence only happens if we say bad words to each other or have bad feelings. That if we could just get rid of bad words and bad feelings, we'll have world peace and everybody's going to be happy. And it's like, what?
Yeah, well, I guess they think they're going to achieve their abolish 2000 agenda, which is the disarmament plan. So then I guess our only tools for violence are our words. So in their warped world. But hey, what is this? Individual, collective? Yeah, this is Game B. It's just get rid of the internal, external. Yeah. So we're
Yeah, we
just
got to really work on bringing this to light. People need to toughen up and understand this game. Like, this is so important. That
so
angle.
important.
Yeah.
So with the French Revolution and what we're experiencing today, so do you see that we're kind of like in like a revival of, it's kind of like a new iteration of the French Revolution?
Yeah, in the sense of trying to turn off and turn on society again. Yeah. I mean, that's
In
really
terms
what
of the Great Reset.
yeah, there's so many parallels, and I don't want to make it too explicit because I want people
Yeah.
to sort of let some of this stew and think about on
Yeah.
their own how
Sure.
and in what ways what we just went
Unpack.
through
Yeah.
applies to the world that they're in right now. But yeah, that's a good challenge for people. Think about how many ways everything you just experienced over the last 2 hours is
Yeah.
useful to understand the world that you're living in right now. Try it out. I'd say one thing that's also of note
Yeah.
is the again, Cynthia's work on this stuff is so useful for me. But so the Dominicans are important in ways that are surprising because the Dominicans were created by Dominic de Guzman in 1215. Well, there's a female order created first in 1206. The male order was in 1215. In the wake of the Fourth Crusade, which saw Venice consolidate its power hold over the world. It had sort of unseated Constantinople as the seat of the new Roman Empire. That was Venice. And a lot of the ruling patrician families had by that time migrated to Venice and Amalfi as well, which is where you have the Isle of Capri. So where Emperor Tiberius had his temples of Cybele and Mithra and anyway. That's also where the Knights of Malta got their symbol, was Amalfi, another city-state in Italy, semi-rival to Venice, but they often collaborated. Anyway, that's the Templar, or the Maltese cross was Amalfi. Now the Dominicans were set up in the wake of this victory of the Fourth Crusade, and by de Guzman, that's him, Saint Dominic, and he had a friend named Francis of Assisi. They met a couple of times. They worked together. A lot of monuments of both of them together hugging. Francis of Assisi's cult was sanctioned by Rome to become an order in 1209, the same year as the Children's Crusade that sent a bunch of kids, like 40,000 kids, off to the Holy Land. They all disappeared. They were all like abducted and sent into slavery and whatever else under the Templars and the Hospitallers. Probably the Hospitallers did most of that stuff because they controlled all of the hotels, the hospices along the way, which is where people would sleep. Great way to abduct kids. So the Saint Francis created this female version of the Dominican male version of these orders that would work together. Oh yeah, there you are. They're hugging. The male order, the Mithraic sort of version of it under the Dominicans, ushered in the Inquisition. Their symbol was a dog holding a torch, making the point that we are the dogs of Jesus who will burn the world with Christ. And people say, "Oh, it's metaphorical." And it's like, well, look what the Inquisition did. Auto da fe, anybody? Like that's they were burning people alive.
Yeah.
They were set up in Germany and Italy, and later on in Spain under Ferdinand II. In France, there were different inquisitions all set up, largely to stoke the fires of intercivilizational conflict. So anybody, like, that was what was behind the expulsion of the Muslims from Spain. Anybody who was presumed to be a convert but not a full convert, like, might still be, because you by threat of death you weren't allowed to be in one of these Inquisition territories if you were a Jew or if you were a Muslim or if you weren't the right kind of Christian. So if people were secretively worshiping their old religion, they would be burnt. It's a capital crime. And both, while the Franciscans, oh yeah, there's the dog of fire. While the Franciscans were nominally giving sermons to like sheep and horses and chickens and trees with the logic that we should give sermons to animals. That's why, St. Francis is the environmentalist pope, the patron saint of the environment, because he believed, everything is equal in God's creation, whether a human or a dog, it's the same thing because they're both created in God's image. So with him came more of a Gaia practice, and yet the Franciscans participated in all of the Inquisitions. It was either Dominicans or Franciscans together. No one else was dominating the Inquisitions for centuries. Now, what Cynthia brought up in her research on some of this occultism in France is, and she also went into Mazzini pretty deeply in a crazy way too, but is that the Jacobins had gotten their name from the chapel of on Saint Jacques. The chapel of Saint Jacques, what was it called? Boy, I forget. Anyway, but there was a Dominican chapel on Saint Jacques Street. So the Dominicans were known as the Jacobins because of the Saint Jacques location of their headquarters in France.
Mhm.
And the Dominicans gave, when the Jacobins couldn't get a place in the assembly, they needed a place to meet up. And the Dominicans let them use their lead headquarter chapel as the center for where the Jacobins would rally, meet, carry out their planning sessions, and then go into their revolutionary or counter-revolutionary organizing. And if you think about it, like, they were facilitated by the Dominicans. It was always known that their mandate was to overthrow Christianity, but the Dominicans still helped them do it, even though the Dominicans were willing to burn the earth for Jesus, right? And if you look at the way that the Jacobin trials were carried out before the guillotines, which killed off 40,000 at least people, they're good and the bad alike, and a lot of peasants and church members and stuff. They were carried out modeled on the Inquisition practices that had been done already for centuries. So that's really what it was. That was the terror. Secret trials, secret committees. So an important aspect of this is that there's certain variations of Christianity that might have an outwardly Christian veneer, and I'm sure a lot of Dominican monks and nuns were perfectly fine people. They, totally fine people, but you have an esoteric inner core which really wants to overthrow Christianity. So when you look at some of the embrace, certain types of variations of Christianity that we're seeing popularized amongst those reacting against the Great Reset language, there's something that Mel Gibson is into as far as a mystical Catholicism that might be more rooted in, like, Albert Magnus, the alchemist, Dominican alchemist of the 13th century, who was a founding philosopher to, like, the Rosicrucians than people might realize. So be very careful with what kind of Christianity you're taking in if that's your bag.
Right. No, I think and I do think there's targeted deception. It's being couched in a very Christian looking veneer, but that's not what is underneath, as you said, the inner circle. It's interesting with the Knights of Malta, and this is just a theory, but there's so much infiltration in the medical freedom movement, and, like, there's so many psyops in there, and the like exoteric veneer of the Knights of Malta is that they do medical charity. And so I don't know. I again, it's just a theory, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're behind seeding a lot of the subversive infiltration that we're seeing through that movement. There's a lot of cults, a lot of various religious groups and esoteric religions that are in that movement, and they're definitely not what they appear to be.
Well, we know that the Red Cross, the YMCA were big parts of geopolitical controls before the Cold War. Throughout the Cold War, they were operational in Russia and China and the United States. They were sort of like seen as these global good doers, but they were hugely influential in shaping world systems. Also child trafficking, other things, creating like little hedonistic frenzies of gay orgies in different parts of the world that were part of the grooming process. YMCAs everywhere. Maury Strong's uncle, Frank Strong, was the president of the YMCA. Maury Strong himself was overseeing, in was it Baca Grande in Colorado, this giant, center of global cults that would Manitou. Yeah, there we are.
It's run by his wife, Hannah.
Yeah, she's still kicking. Yeah, so that's creepy, and that's also overseeing like the biggest underground aquifers in the United States, right? Is he's got a control over that. So there's definitely underground stuff that they're also doing there, and they're like there's a cavernous system under this gigantic territory that does weird new age rituals above and then weird stuff below. And I think the A24 movies too, there's this one A24 movie that Madison and Macy Holmes, who are really, really sharp young people in Calgary, they're friends of ours. And actually Madison gave a class on Rachel what's her name? Rachel Wilson's book on occult feminism, and it was
Great.
She added so much of her own stuff. It was great, crazy good. But she brought this movie to my attention called, from A24, this messed up, super sophisticated film studio, which is doing like a next level social engineering. I find it fascinating. Like they're the ones who did Civil War, the movie. But there's this one called Under the Lake, Under the Silver Lake or something.
Okay.
It's so interesting to watch the messaging and manipulation. Which I'll just say it like that. Actually, people should go and watch that movie, Under the Silver Lake. I want to say it, but it might. But yeah, basically, it involves a certain QAnon type of personality profile. Under the Silver Lake, there it is. Yeah, this young kind of pathetic guy going nowhere in life who's got a lot of like psychosexual issues. It's really done. It's profiled a certain demographic in the population who will watch this, who's driven into obsession about this girl who disappears after she sees a certain sign in the night sky represented by some fireworks after like one night. And he's just so obsessed, and he starts seeing symbols everywhere, like little signs. And it's like encryption keys. And he's kind of going on his like weird little journey, discovering that there is this, like, it's like an esoteric journey, tracing out what might have happened to her. And he ends up in like a Baca Grande type of Maurice Strong plantation site with something really fucked up that I think it actually touches on what we discussed with the Jack the Ripper story and what actually happened to one of the key figures who carried out the Jack the Ripper murders and some others.
Wow.
And why they seem to disappear. Anyway, I feel like anything I say is going to just open up a can of worms.
Yeah, no, it's okay. But yeah, it's interesting how the movies are. I mean, I think there's always been kind of like a predictive programming element to entertainment, but today it's like very, I feel like it's much more bold. It's really hard to miss it.
Yeah, it's more, well, it's everywhere, right? Like you're saying, it's such a part of our culture now. It's not like it used to be where there was our culture and then there was this thing that was trying to like get in. It's like it's like now not only gotten in, but it's built up the edifice that we're all in. So everything that used to be fringe crazy has been increasingly normalized. And so it's kind of everywhere. There's trace of it even for people who don't know what they're doing, just by virtue of them having gone through the like, if I had stayed in my fine arts film animation program in university and didn't develop like a critical faculty, if I just stayed in that modality, I likely would have come out of that, had I been successful, working my way up, expressing my creativity as it was groomed into me, and ultimately being a tool promoting evil agendas without me even not being aware of it. Like what I was imagining for my scenarios, for my storylines, were not of my own. They had my own personal coloring, but they were all like tropes infused into me by H.G. Wells and Sir Edward Bulwer Lytton and these other like, grand strategists way before I was born.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, I'm glad that was broken.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, sure. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. There's that movie, it's a very different one, but have you seen it just reminded me of, but have you seen Landscape with the Invisible Hand?
No, is it interesting?
It's very interesting, and I haven't seen the one you just did, but I have a feeling there's some overlap in the themes. It's not a great movie. Like I wouldn't say it's super enjoyable, but the operational preparation of the environment is quite heavy-handed. It's it's kind of about like an alien takeover. The Great Reset has happened, and the aliens that come in are like the ruling class, Yeah, the gooey people. They're the ones that run the world. Yeah, and they're and there's like a young couple who's a reality television show creator, but I won't ruin the whole thing. But it's basically the idea that there is this oligarchical ruling elite, but they're aliens. They've come in, and so everybody is stratified.
Well, that's ultimately what they're trying to nudge us towards anyway, right? And don't get me wrong, the Under the Silver Lake is a terrible movie. It might probably piss people off.
Yeah.
Piss me off. But I find it interesting. It's interesting for that other reason that we were all talking about. But,
yeah, that's the same. It wasn't a great movie, but but in terms of it as a reconnaissance project, it was very interesting.
Yeah. But one of the things, and this is again self-promo time again. The episode 3 of the Hidden Hand Behind UFOs. What we're really trying to get across is that, as Wernher von Braun had said correctly to his assistant back in the 70s, that after the Soviet Union, they're going to bring online a new fear of terrorism, then another kind of thing, and then they're going to bring in the alien card as the final thing. And so I think that's what they've been consciously building the framework and the edifice for, by manipulating our collective imagination about what is the future, what is human nature, what is our past, through the media, through the types of accepted scripts that get turned into the movies, into the shows, into the books, into the comics that shape our collective zeitgeist. So they've been sort of creating the framework, but the ultimate objective is to get us to think that the oligarchy, that aliens have been in communication with humans at least since Roswell, but honestly, they want us to think that they've been there the whole time, and that it was the aliens that gave all of the accomplishments of science and tech to build pyramids or whatever, to initiated high priests that maybe were doing certain psychedelics, maybe different mushrooms that gave them access to the 5th or 6th dimension. And, quantum mechanics proves that those things exist, even though nobody's ever proven that those exist except by mathematical probability theory, which doesn't mean anything. But point being is, that's the thesis, is that the aliens, not humans, there's nothing about the mind that can account for discontinuous, beautifully creative leaps of discovery. No. We don't do that. The mind can't do that. That's an impossibility. So don't even try to find that within yourself. It's all been given to us by aliens communicating with special elites who have the insight of mystical drugs. And they've been there the whole time, especially since Roswell, since the atomic bomb. And why did they come out a little bit more openly with all of the sightings after 1947? Well, it's because the atomic bomb made the aliens concerned, that this new technology could cause so much destruction. So now they made their presence known. And even though they probably gave us the atomic bomb to begin with, so ignore that paradox. But now they're setting the stage for the broader disclosure. They've been preparing us to understand what we formerly could not understand, and now we're almost ripe for the picking, for the big reveal that the elites have been dealing with aliens, and maybe they are aliens, and the aliens probably created us anyway from some hybrid laboratory infusing alien DNA into monkeys. And so that's been put into Stargate, right? All of these shows and movies. In Indiana Jones, Steven Spielberg has been assigned early on to promote this stuff. George Lucas had as one of his gurus, Hero with 1,000 Faces guy, SRI was his name.
Campbell.
Yeah, Campbell was the guy who
changing images of man. Yep.
Yeah, Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard's cosmology itself is tied to Leadbeater and what Leadbeater was already putting forth regarding these alien entities from other planets and star systems for a new cosmos. And then, they just modified it with various generations of sci-fi. Heinlein and the Dune guy, Frank Herbert, they're all part of just modifying, adding more flesh to the bones of this general theosophical Gnostic, archon, aeon structure with root races and all sorts of weird shit from the past that were seeded from another dimension or galaxy or both. And they're advising George Lucas. They're grooming Luke. That's what's behind Lucas. That's what's behind Spielberg, are these creatures who are using these people. Could have been anybody, but they were individuals who had ideology and talent, and they were let's give you the resources to be creative.
Yeah. rascals, and therefore they were.
Oh, I just lost you. Can you say that again? My internet.
I said the mice to rascals, and therefore they were recruited to be the agents.
Yeah, it's ushering the new age of man, right? Changing images of man, and that's what the Esalen Institute was directly working with, and so yeah, they ultimately are. That's the big sort of setup that they've been preparing for, is that Jesus was an alien, Muhammad was an alien, Moses was an alien. That's what the Bush was. They're trying to redefine, reframe through some weird NLP manipulation what all of our sacred stories were all about. That's why children were getting abducted by the stories of children getting abducted by, elves in Celtic Ireland or the medieval ages. You got these stories of elves abducting people, especially kids. And it's like, yeah, they were all aliens. Those are alien. Those people hundreds of years ago just didn't know what they were looking at, so they called them elves or fairies, but they were aliens. And it's like, no, there were witch covens, just like we have today, carrying out sacrifices of kids, just like they're doing today, as a big part of their way of being this is what Cotton Mather was fighting against in the early colonies. There was actual hardcore witch covens everywhere, being spawned and overseen by these Gnostic, sects around the Hellfire Club. So it's like, no, it's not that. There's nothing to see there. They were just looking at aliens causing the kids to disappear.
Well, if by aliens we mean demons, maybe there's truth there.
Sure.
I thought that was interesting. He pulled up on the screen with that latest conversation between Elon and Tucker, and Elon was talking about aliens and his beliefs on UFOs. What's going on there is just that now Elon's saying that he's dark MAGA.
Yeah.
Have you seen that? Yeah. So it's I don't know all the I don't know all the marionettes that are involved, but it does look like there's so many of these the same cults that you're talking about.
Well, it's hypnotic inductions, right? He's putting hypnotic inductions because the MAGA movement as it is not sufficiently in touch with their dark force. They're not dominant. They haven't integrated in a Jungian way with the inner darkness to be sufficiently useful to go phoenix the Republic. They need to have the Cold War, the Civil War. People are still too like passive. Like they're too much into using reason and morality to not be triggered into violence against the far left. So they have to be nudged to be more courageous and tap into that shadow that governs them to be more like, pick up the gun and go kill some Antifa. Like you got to be more burn it down. So that's part of the dark MAGA is a broader psychological hypnotic induction to get a bigger swath of the population to tap into that strength that they need.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, I did see it as like a kind of a hermetic, kind of alchemical, the dark and the light, and they're unifying. But you worded it really well. That's very scary.
Well, they're doing also on Amazon Prime. Cynthia and I were just watching the new Star Wars show on Amazon Prime, and what's that? What military? Elon Musk reveals what military sightings of UFOs really are as he promises to share evidence of aliens on X. Yeah, okay, sure.
Okay. There we go.
Yeah.
Project Bluebeam is coming to fruition.
Transhumanists, anyway. Yeah. What was I going to say? What was I just saying?
Oh, you were talking about a movie that you and Cynthia just watched?
Oh, yeah. So the new Star Wars show on Amazon Prime. It's short. There's like 8 episodes. But yeah, the whole thing is you start, with a Jedi teacher with a bunch of like young Jedi, initiates. And at first you're supposed to side with these guys. There's a girl who's a twin, right? Who's the star of the show. She's got an identical twin. Obviously, one twin ends up getting swayed by this purely evil Seth Lord guy who's all about Thelema, and you will to power. And he's like murdering mercilessly what seems to be really innocent, good young people. He's just murdering them. And this girl's horrified, this twin, right? But she's getting seduced. And they're nudging you. And by episode 6, you're like, wait a minute, the good Jedi mentor is actually the bad guy because he, in his righteous folly, is like a Christian Dominican type who earlier burnt down villages of witch covens, of which the mother of these twins was a leading witch, a good woman, very beautiful soul, who got burned by this like rigid, stoic Jedi knight warrior who burnt them all down and killed the mother. And then ultimately it turns out that, they do this shift. They shift the focus of empathy, where now all of a sudden you're like, whoa, the Sith guy, the Sith Lord, is actually on the right side. I don't like him, but I'm more inclined to identify with the evil, the darkness now, because it's more authentic and it's actually more just and more human than the fake good guy. And so it's actually the good guy who gets killed, and the bad guy becomes the good guy. And they do the same thing with the school.
Anti-hero.
The anti-hero, yeah. So it's all about, like, again, it's a twin. And part of the twin thing is that their origin story is that they were birthed by this witch who had sex with herself, kind of like Sophia did in the Gnostic scriptures, who procreated with herself gave birth to Yaldabaoth, who's the character in the secret teachings of James, or the secret book of John. Yaldabaoth is the demonic, evil, ignorant God of the Old Testament, who made the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, and made the world in his image, which was ignorant and evil. Thus, they're in their mind, they look at all of matter and creation in the mind as being different grades of evil that we have to escape from, that was made in the image of Yaldabaoth. So in the case of the Pistis Sophia, who gave rise to Yaldabaoth, she was as ignorant and hateful of men, which is why she had sex with herself and produced these things. And these kids, these twins, are the procreation of this species of witch that procreates with themselves with the help of some, CRISPR type technology, like artificial insemination stuff, but it's all there, like all of these Gnostic messaging things to unify us with our inner darkness, as part of like Carl Jung's esoteric real teaching, instead of the dumbed down version for the non-initiates, which might have some usefulness, on some level, but the inner teaching of what Carl Jung was actually doing in Bollingen Tower, like that shit, that's what they want to try to get us all to tap into, our own inner evil. So then we can do the Phoenix.
So we can do the Phoenix. Yeah. Well, on that very
Harry Potter too, right? Harry Potter, the Order of the Phoenix. You got it all over the place too, right? Of like Dumbledore and the bad guy who's like a gay lover of Dumbledore, representing the Phoenix, or the side of the Grendel, or whatever, the side of light and the side of darkness, that have this gay love affair, that need each other, can't live without each other. And you got this whole thing throughout the stories of the Order of the Phoenix and the thing like that. So they're always trying to unify these characteristics in the minds, especially of young people who have been getting hit with this really, really hard.
Yeah, really, really hard. And the Phoenix, it is the tear down so we can build back better and we can have the Great Reset. That's
right.
That seems to be the whole theme. So it's probably the image for the Great Reset. It should just be the Phoenix.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, the Phoenix is great. Like I was saying, my grandfather named the company, but it was because he felt like the other one was because what was it? Demon Brothers, because he felt like they worked so hard, like little demons, and the reason he named it Phoenix was because he felt like they were, rising up from the ashes because they had fallen so many times. So I don't think he had any awareness that it was, some sort of a, esoteric messaging, but there is the idea of like this is really interesting. I had just gone to a religious sermon, and he was talking about how it was super, super woke, and he was talking about how resiliency is not about overcoming, it's about becoming. And so the reason I brought this up is because I think my grandfather was thinking about the Phoenix in terms of resilience, like overcoming the, all the devastation, all the loss, and all the failures. You rise back up. That's like the story of the American dream. That's what the human spirit, right?
Right.
Is to be able to overcome. But what they're talking about is becoming. The reason you tear it down is to become something different, so we can be unburdened by what has been. Right?
Yeah, right. Or it's like you've got this, because that's the thing with this type of ambiguity. Like we're swimming in ambiguity when we're in that realm
Yeah.
where of and everything can be read on multiple levels. Now, the good people who actually have matured and ennobled their souls,
Yeah.
will typically get into the thick of it and try to reinterpret or reframe. This is like good NLP. It's like try to reframe things that were done for bad purposes, but re-nudge them towards what they're nominally selling themselves to be. Right? Like globalization. It's there to bring us all together for cooperation and world harmony and peace, so that we can open up trade barriers and have better competition and thus creative innovation. That's how it's sold to us. It's not sold from the intention. If they said that out loud, nobody would accept it, which is shut down trade barriers to undermine nations, to move the structures of power from democratic institutions to supranational corporations and banking cartels that are loyal only to a mystery cult of initiates that want to kill us. No, they wouldn't do that. So, but you could say, if you're somebody who finds themselves in a position of political power and you don't want to just, that you can't just go and take on the beast head on, you'll be crushed. What you can do, if you've got that like human spark of creativity and courage, you can go into it and try to reorganize those institutions in that language towards what it's actually intended to do. Which is like, you could say, okay, we want competition. Well, let's actually, have a commitment to build something needed for humanity. Let's double food production, and let's see who can get the job done better. And they will get contracts to get that. And we've seen that in like Africa and Tanzania. They've opened up for a different kind of free trade, where they've got like this big high-speed rail project that's being built. And they said, hey, okay, we're committed as a nation to build this project. It's going to connect up into Ethiopia. That's already built a Djibouti to Addis Ababa rail line already built up, and it's going to extend. They want to extend it across the continent. It's created a lot of jobs. It's opened up new corridors. All sorts of nonlinear good effects have happened, but new manufacturing, new hospitals, new infrastructure has been built up. But now we're in Tanzania. They were like, okay, let's do it. And they said, okay, let's take international bidders. Who can do the job? So, and they broke it down to 4 different components. So they got like one company from China, one company from UAE, one company from, I think, Germany, another company from some other Middle Eastern country. And they're like all building it. And it's designed to be standardized to connect together. And that's like good competition. Everybody's trying to get the job done faster at deadline with the budget that they promised. And so, you're getting quality and price that's being met to get the job done. That works. But they're not coming out saying, hey, by the way, we know that sustainable development is designed to kill us by Maurice Strong. They're just saying, like, hey, if we want sustainable development, we need sustained development. So they're just changing it towards like, let's actually develop this thing. Or, like they got a big project in China right now to say, oh, let's have green development by greening the Gobi Desert. Like that's happening right now. It's this massive 30-year project that's like 2/3 done to move like water that floods in the south and to move it through canals and channels into the north where there's desert. And that's already happening. They've built something like 70 gigawatts of electricity along the way. They're green, but it's all based on the idea that, hey, we all like green. But so if we do, we want more green things, more photosynthesis, right? Let's like create more food.
We need more carbon dioxide for that, but yeah.
yeah. Well, then you're creating like industry along the. Whereas in the West, our idea of green that was given to us by Prince Philip and Bernhard and all these eugenicists is, let's liberate the deserts from hydroelectric dams. So we've already like demolished 1,000 hydroelectric dams in the United States since the year 2000. Four of the biggest ones in California, right? They paid $500 million to demolish dams to liberate the desert, to its natural ecosystem. And you're destroying food production, energy availability for industry and for residential use. It's all being destroyed. You're killing humans to save nature from humans. So that's their idea of green, is create more deserts or put solar panels all over the United States. That means cutting down forests to put solar panels, which is only going to increase heating by like 5 degrees. So you're going to make more desertification. That's the most anti-green policy. It's anti-life. So it's
anti-life, literally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah, Phoenix thing, yeah, like definitely that's a healing thing. It could be we should take back the Phoenix, right? Like
I'm on a mission to take back all of these things. I mean, right now, like I want to take back the rainbow. I want to take back the
yeah,
Phoenix. And they're
I want the rainbow too.
right.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
used to love the rainbow. That was my favorite thing to draw when I was a kid.
me too. I was obsessed with the rainbow, and I studied like why it, like the fractals that created the different light spectrums, and why it was that, because my favorite were indigo and violet, and you rarely see them in the rainbow. And so I mean, I was obsessed. I was studying all the science behind the rainbow when I was in nursery school. It was my favorite thing ever. And I used to do those scratch outs. You made a rainbow, and then like you put black on top of it, and then you scratch it out and you make a pretty rainbow in all different shapes. And anyway, yeah, I want to take back the rainbow. But there's so many now. I think too, I told this story in my last speech that I did about the flag, because the flag had become agitprop to the left. It was like they saw it as a sign of being quote unquote right wing or Republican. And as a kid, I never understood it, because I was like, because my mom would always tell my dad to take down our flag. Yeah, there's a beautiful rainbow, a double rainbow. But I would tell my mom, I didn't understand, like, why are you telling daddy to take down the flag? Like, this is, it's our American flag. And she would explain that, our neighbors weren't happy with it. And it was like a signal to them that we were Republicans. And
That was when you were a kid? That was
when I was a kid. Yeah.
Whoa, you're way ahead of the curve. I thought that was a more recent thing. Oh shit.
Yeah, I was, so I said, well, and I mean, I was really young at the time. I said, I don't understand. Isn't it the American flag? So don't Democrats and Republicans like the flag? This just seemed like common sense to me. It's an American flag. It's not a Democrat or a Republican flag. And they explained, no, that it's been, somehow stigmatized. But now I'm seeing that there's a movement by the left to try and, steal the flag back as a symbol. This is in propaganda. It's called transfer. And it's, they take that iconic symbol, and then they change the meaning of it so that it becomes commonly understood as something else. And I think now the left is trying to say that they're the party of patriotism, and so they're reclaiming the flag. But all that to say, I want to take back all the symbols. I know people have told me that my podcast logo is a lotus, and that has like esoteric symbolism. And I'm like, dude, it's like rebirth and peace and love and beauty, and like, what, do we have to give them everything? Like,
I know. No, I'm pretty sure. Just because I've come from the culture at different times in my life. I think I've done this. Like, I think I've done that before. Like, or this. And or this, or there's things you do.
Yeah, sure.
Or
I
like,
used to do this all the time. Like at the end of like routines, or like an athletic, I'd be like that. And now people are like, oh, why are you doing this? Like, I'm like, really? I mean, it's videos from years ago when I knew nothing. I knew, like, I definitely was not signaling anything.
Or this one too, right? The hidden hand.
Oh yeah,
that's a bit weirder. That's a bit weirder, actually, I guess.
That is weird.
You probably have to think about what you're doing there generally. but overall, yeah, like there's so many. Yeah, people get a little bit too symbol minded. And there's this pattern recognition thinking, which computers do.
Yes.
And it's useful to look at patterns and to see associations. It's a useful component or within the tool basket of tools we can work with as people trying to map out reality. It's one of many useful tools. But if we get too addicted to that, we start making really irresponsible incisions, aka judgments. You measure, you map. And at a certain point, after you've chewed on the food, you got to swallow. After you have to pass a judgment of what you've been analyzing. And some people they measure, they undermeasure, they overcut, and you can't do that. The pattern recognition only takes you so far, because sometimes it might sound like a duck and look like a duck, but it may not. It may be a robot. It may not be a duck. So you want to think about. We always want to hold out and self-examine our assumptions before we make a judgment. And when we do make a judgment, it's like a sacred thing. It's like you have to make sure that you've measured like 18 times or more, and you're still ready for a new argument to reevaluate how you might have, maybe you've got a pretty good grounding on something that you've discovered,
Right.
but you could there's probably new considerations you have yet to make that would change how you think about the definition of the thing you thought you knew really perfectly well. Right.
Yeah.
And if we get that sort of more process oriented thinking, we navigate through things much more responsibly. But so many people just they want shortcuts. They want to get AI to give them a watered down summary explanation of something complex for their minds to swallow easily without chewing appropriately. And it's like, no, you have to do the work of the chewing, of the reading original writings in their entirety before you actually earn the right to swallow. If you get some AI to give you an executive summary, you will get bad habits and start swallowing things you shouldn't be swallowing much more easily, that will result in stomach aches or death.
Yeah. I'm so concerned about this, and it's it's a real problem. And the trajectory I'm seeing of people using these tools, I'm all for. I mean, technology can be very beneficial, and we can use it, to assist and enhance. But when you're replacing doing the foundational work, and it becomes just a shortcut, then I think we're seeing a complete devolution of society that's already pretty far degraded, intentionally by design. And to circle back, and we can close out, but when you talk about like the overly mystical, and then the kind of like the faith of reason, there is a middle ground there, like all human beings, because we are not omnipotent and we're not omnipresent, and, we're limited and we're flawed. There is always an element of faith, because we have to, we have to take a leap sometimes, because we don't know everything, and that we can't know everything. That's just not possible. It's intrinsically inherent in being human that we are limited. And so, that is kind of the middle ground, that you can have logic and reason, and you can have that combined with faith, but you have to recognize that that element is faith. That doesn't mean that it is so just because you believe it to be so. That you can, measure and analyze many data points, and then you still may not have the answer, but you can say, okay, there are things that I don't know, and I'm okay with not knowing, but I can also agree to work with what we have, because there's some things that are self-evident,
On that note here, let's end with a quote. Let's end with a quote by Max Planck, which I read during our Gestalt psychology conversation on Eric Trist some months back. Max Planck, who was a concert pianist, said, and I quote, in his Philosophy of Physics of 1935, but he's the guy who discovered the quantum, right? That there's this quantum universe with the help of Einstein, who they both did music together. They were both performing Mozart and Bach together as part of their creative process. Max Planck says, science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature, and that is because in the last analysis, we ourselves are part of nature, and therefore part of the mystery that we are trying to solve. Music and art are, to an extent, also attempts to solve or at least express that mystery. But to my mind, the more we progress with either, the more we are brought into harmony with all nature itself. And that is one of the greatest services of science to the individual. I just love that.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I think that's a great place to end. I love it. And thank you. I always enjoy these. Super fun for me. And please tell everybody where they can find you, find your latest film, and all that good stuff.
Okay, so that film right there, The Hidden Hand Behind UFOs, Episode 3, The New Age of the Sorcerers, UFOs, MKUltra, and Cold War, is now available, easy to find, on CanadianPatriot.org, which is there. Also, there's updates that we do every few days as well of videos and written material, which is there. That's Episode 2. If you like Episode 3, Episode 2 is H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds and the Dawn of a New Age, which is also available at that link. And the one previous to that is go down a little bit more. Oh no, go up a bit more. Okay. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that's Episode 1.
Yeah.
Episode 1 is Lifting the Esoteric Veil. That Cynthia Chung wrote that one solo. The other one she wrote with me. And that one goes into the mystery cults all the way up to the age of spiritualists and the Fox sisters as the Swedenborgians and the Mormons as sort of the foundational understanding you need to have to appreciate what the whole UFO thing has been about. So that's episode 1. You can check all of those out. We make them all available for free. We don't charge anybody for these things. If people want to help out, because we have about 6 more to do for the series to be completed.
Ooh.
The next one is going to be more into the UFO cults before we go into the CIA and sci-fi more generally. If people want to help out, they can either get a paid upgrade on my Substack. That's my Substack right there, matthewehret.substack.com. And there's free and paid. There's also, for people who want to like help, each one's about $6,000 to $10,000 to make a video.
Wow.
So we really rely on crowd sponsoring, on people who are able to make donations. Sometimes I get lucky and a person with a bit more resources can offer to sponsor a whole video. Hasn't happened in a while, but if that can happen soon, I'd really appreciate that. So just putting it out there for those who might want to do that. That they can do on the Canadian Patriot website or the Rising Tide Foundation website under Support Us. And also our books are available as well. We've got signed copies. If people want to buy those, they can write a message to us through our websites and order those signed, or the Amazon books are available too.
Awesome. Well, yes, thank you so much. And thank you all for watching and listening.
Yeah, thank you.